Case 1, Rhonda Marie Fisher, Colorado, 1987. On April 1, 1987, a passing motorist traveling along a rural highway south of Denver noticed something unusual down an embankment. When the driver stopped to look more closely, the outline of a human body became visible. Law enforcement was contacted, and deputies arrived to confirm the discovery of a deceased woman. The victim was later identified as 30-year-old Rhonda Marie Fisher. At the time of the discovery, there were no witnesses, no immediate suspects, and no clear explanation for how she ended up miles away from where she had last been seen. The case would remain unresolved for nearly 4 decades. Rhonda Marie Fisher's body was located down an embankment alongside a rural roadway approximately 35 miles south of Denver. Investigators determined that she had been assaulted and strangled. The scene suggested that her body had been deliberately placed at the location, rather than the area being the site of the assault itself. Authorities established that Fisher had last been seen the night before, walking north on Monaco Street toward Leetsdale Drive in Denver. The distance between her last known location and where her body was found raised immediate questions about how she traveled there and who she encountered along the way. But the physical evidence available at the scene did not match any clear suspect narrative. Fisher was a mother, daughter, sister, and friend. In the weeks leading up to her death, she had been staying with various acquaintances rather than maintaining a fixed residence. This transient living situation complicated early efforts to reconstruct her final days. Detectives worked to establish her routine, social connections, and movements, but conflicting accounts and limited documentation made timelines difficult to verify. Several individuals she had stayed with were interviewed, and at least one acquaintance was considered a person of interest early in the investigation. However, no evidence emerged that could definitively link anyone in her immediate circle to the crime. It would take only days for the investigation to stall. Over the years, detectives pursued multiple investigative angles. They examined Fisher's known associates, reviewed reports of similar crimes, and evaluated whether her death could be connected to serial offenders active in the Denver area during the late 1970s through the 1980s. Despite repeated reviews and renewed investigative pushes, forensic limitations prevented meaningful progress. Evidence was preserved, but early DNA testing methods were unable to produce a usable suspect profile. A later attempt to reanalyze evidence in 2017 also failed to generate a match. As time passed, leads were exhausted, witnesses moved on, and the case gradually went cold. Then, decades later, preserved evidence was reviewed again under new forensic standards. In early 2025, the Douglas County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit conducted a comprehensive review of all remaining evidence. Items that had never been retested were submitted for analysis, including brown paper bags that had been placed over Fisher's hands at the crime scene and stored untouched for decades. Skin cells transferred to the inside of those bags produced a viable DNA profile. In late October 2025, investigators obtained a match through the combined DNA index system. The DNA was linked to Vincent Darrell Groves, a convicted serial offender who had died in prison in 1996. When confronted with the findings, investigators confirmed Groves had been active during the time of Fisher's death. Because Vincent Darrell Groves was deceased, no arrest or prosecution could follow. However, investigators formally concluded that he was responsible for Rhonda Marie Fisher's death. Groves was already believed to be responsible for multiple violent crimes targeting vulnerable women across Colorado between 1978 and 1988. The announcement brought long-awaited answers to a case unresolved for nearly 40 years. Fisher had no immediate family still alive, but a surviving cousin was notified of the conclusion and expressed relief at finally knowing what happened. While no trial could occur, the case was officially closed through forensic confirmation. Case 2, Mary Alice Maloney, Tennessee Jane Doe, 2007. On November 14, 2007, a routine search in a wooded area of Tennessee led to an unexpected discovery. What began as an unrelated missing person effort ended with the location of human remains concealed in dense brush. The body was partially skeletal and offered no immediate identification. With no name, no witnesses, and no clear trail, the discovery marked the beginning of a case that would remain unresolved for nearly 2 decades. For investigators, the woman's silence became one of the region's most enduring mysteries. The remains were discovered by Officer Rob Hayes while he was searching a wooded area off Hollingdale Road in La Vergne, Tennessee, approximately hidden in Brew. The body belonged to a woman who had been left unclothed, with only a few pieces of jewelry still present. There was no identification at the scene, and the condition of the remains suggested the body had been there for an extended period. A medical examination determined that the woman had died from a gunshot wound to the head. The circumstances indicated a homicide rather than an accidental or natural death. With no missing person immediately matching the discovery, the case entered the system as an unidentified homicide with limited leads. The woman was cataloged as a Jane Doe, estimated to be between 25 and 49 years old. Investigators believed she may have been African American or multiracial, but the available forensic methods of the time could not provide certainty. Her jewelry was documented and preserved in the hope that it might later be recognized. Detectives reviewed missing person reports from surrounding states and conducted outreach through law enforcement databases. Despite these efforts, no connection could be established. Without a name, her background, relationships, and final movements remained unknown. Over time, the case stalled, not for lack of effort, but due to the limitations of the technology available in 2007. For years, the case remained cold as investigators from different generations attempted to find a match. In April 2021, advances in genetic genealogy offered a new path forward. Preserved evidence from the remains was submitted for DNA testing and compared against public genealogy databases. A distant familial match was identified, providing the first meaningful lead since the body was discovered. Genetic genealogists work to build a family tree, tracing relationships across generations. The process was slow and methodical, requiring careful verification at each step. Gradually, the unknown woman began to take shape as a real person with a traceable history. In late November 2025, investigators confirmed the woman's identity as Mary Alice Maloney. She was 40 years old at the time of her death and originally from Connecticut. Records showed that she had been living in Nashville, Tennessee, when she disappeared. Authorities estimated that she was killed in the spring or summer of 2007, months before her remains were discovered. The identification restored her name to official records after 18 years. Although no suspect was named, the breakthrough marked a significant milestone. For the first time, investigators knew who the victim was, even if the circumstances of her death remained unresolved. Despite the identification, no arrest has been made in Mary Alice Maloney's case. The investigation into her death remains active, and authorities continue to seek information about her movements and associations prior to her disappearance. Detectives have asked anyone who knew her in Tennessee or Connecticut to come forward with even minor details. While the case has not reached a courtroom, the restoration of her identity closed one chapter of uncertainty. The unanswered questions surrounding who ended her life and why continue to guide the investigation forward. Case 3, Dolers Marie Muta Thompson, Maryland, 1988. On the morning of February 1, 1988, police were called to an apartment in Frederick, Maryland, after concerns were raised about a young woman who had not been heard from. Inside the residence, officers found 23-year-old Dolers Marie Muta Thompson deceased. There were no signs of forced entry, no immediate witnesses, and no clear explanation for what had occurred. The quiet scene offered few answers, marking the beginning of a case that would remain unresolved for decades. Dolores Thompson was found inside her apartment on the 100 block of South Market Street in Frederick. Investigators determined that she had been killed by ligature strangulation and that there was evidence of sexual assault. The condition of the apartment showed no obvious signs of a struggle or forced entry, suggesting that the person responsible may have been someone she knew or at least allowed inside. First responders documented the scene and secured physical evidence, including bedding and other materials that could contain biological traces. Despite these efforts, the technology available at the time could not provide a definitive suspect profile. The investigation moved forward, but early progress was limited. Thompson was a young woman with an active social life and regular visitors to her apartment. Investigators focused on individuals who were known to spend time with her, including acquaintances who had frequent access to her home. One such individual, Calvin Ziegler, was interviewed during the original investigation because of his known presence at the apartment. Detectives worked to reconstruct Thompson's routine and determine who had last seen her alive. Friends and associates were questioned, but no conclusive evidence emerged to directly connect any individual to the crime. As days turned into weeks, the lack of clear leads slowed momentum. Evidence collected from the crime scene was preserved as the case progressed. However, forensic science in 1988 lacked the sensitivity needed to extract and compare usable DNA profiles. Periodic reviews of the case file were conducted over the years, but each re-examination reached the same limitation. The preserved evidence remained stored, waiting for advancements that could unlock its value. As time passed, witnesses became harder to locate, memories faded, and the investigation gradually went cold. Despite the absence of resolution, the case was never officially closed, and the evidence remained intact. In 2025, advances in forensic testing prompted investigators to re-examine items from the original crime scene. Bedding that had never been tested was submitted for analysis. This time, a viable DNA profile was obtained and entered into state and national databases. The profile matched Calvin Ziegler, the same individual interviewed during the initial investigation decades earlier. Records showed that Ziegler had died in 2010. After reviewing the findings and corroborating the evidence, authorities confirmed that the DNA conclusively linked him to the crime. The match provided the first definitive answer since 1988. Because Calvin Ziegler was deceased, no arrest or prosecution could take place. However, in November 2025, the Frederick Police Department and the Frederick County State's Attorney's Office formally concluded that he was responsible for Dolores Thompson's death. The case was officially closed based on forensic confirmation. For Thompson's family and loved ones, the announcement provided long-awaited answers, though it could not undo the loss. After nearly 37 years, the question of who ended her life was resolved, closing a case that had remained unanswered for decades. Case 4, Washington, D.C. Pipe Bombs, 2021-2025. On January 5, 2021, two explosive devices were discovered near major political party headquarters in Washington, D.C. The devices were located less than a mile from the U.S. Capitol and were found before they detonated. Although no one was injured, the discovery immediately raised concerns about public safety and intent. With no suspect identified and limited early leads, the case became one of the most closely watched unresolved investigations tied to a period of national unrest, remaining open for years. Investigators later confirmed that the pipe bombs had been planted the previous evening, January 5, 2021. One device was placed behind the Republican National Committee headquarters on 1st Street Southeast, and the other near the Democratic National Committee headquarters on South Capitol Street Southeast. The bombs were constructed using metal pipes, end caps, electrical wiring, batteries, timers, and steel wool. Both devices were viable and capable of causing serious harm if they had exploded. They were discovered the following afternoon, just as crowds gathered in the city ahead of the events at the Capitol. Law enforcement secured the scenes and began a federal investigation into who placed the devices and why. Although no casualties occurred, the placement and timing of the bombs raised immediate national security concerns. The locations suggested potential political motivation, though investigators did not initially establish a direct connection to the events that unfolded at the Capitol the next day. Surveillance footage showed a person wearing a gray hoodie, gloves, a backpack, and distinctive athletic shoes walking near both locations during the time the bombs were planted. The footage indicated the suspect moved deliberately between the sites. With no explosion and no immediate claim of responsibility, the case remained focused on identifying the individual captured on camera. Over the next several years, investigators reviewed approximately 39,000 video files, conducted thousands of interviews, and processed hundreds of tips. Purchase records for bomb components, cell phone location data, and license plate reader information were collected and preserved. The reward for information increased multiple times as the case remained unsolved. Under new leadership in 2025, federal authorities conducted a comprehensive review of existing evidence rather than relying on new tips. This renewed effort focused on consolidating data that had been gathered since 2021 but not previously connected. The reanalysis identified Brian Cole Jr., a 30-year-old man from Woodbridge, Virginia, as a suspect. Investigators linked his purchase history to materials used in the bombs and found cell phone location data placing him near both sites during the relevant time frame. License plate reader data showed his vehicle near South Capitol Street shortly before the devices were planted. On December 4, 2025, federal agents arrested Cole at his family's residence without incident. Additional searches were conducted at a bail bond business. Connected to his family, authorities stated the arrest resulted from methodical evidence review rather than new information. Following the arrest, federal prosecutors charged Cole with offenses related to transporting and placing explosive devices with intent to harm or intimidate. Court proceedings moved forward as investigators continued reviewing the case. While the evidence outlined how the devices were constructed and placed, a definitive motive was not publicly established. The case advanced through the legal system with unanswered questions remaining about intent and timing. Although the investigation reached a significant conclusion with the arrest, aspects of the case continued to be examined as proceedings unfolded. Case 5, Nikolai Sells, New York, 1976–1991. In September 1991, skeletal human remains were discovered at the bottom of a drained swamp in Orange County, New York. The location was remote, and the condition of the remains suggested the individual had been there for many years. There were no immediate witnesses and no reports of a recent disappearance that matched the scene. What initially appeared to be an isolated discovery soon revealed a far older mystery, one tied to a disappearance that had gone unanswered for decades. The remains were found on September 14, 1991, near the intersection of Woods Road and Eaton Lane in the town of Greenville. The discovery occurred after a property owner drained the swamp, exposing a fully clothed body. Law enforcement responded and documented the scene, recovering several personal items including a wallet without identification, a set of keys, eyeglasses, and a wristwatch. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, investigators were unable to determine an exact cause of death. However, the circumstances were treated as suspicious from the outset. Based on the condition of the remains, authorities estimated that the individual had died between 5 and 20 years before the discovery. The personal items recovered at the scene were carefully cataloged in hopes they might lead to identification. Despite these efforts, none of the items could be linked to a known individual. Investigators developed a DNA profile from the remains and submitted it to national databases, including the combined DNA index system. No match was found. In 2011, the case was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System to expand the search. Even with broader exposure, the identity of the deceased remained unknown. Without a name, detectives were unable to reconstruct the individual's life, relationships, or the circumstances that led to the body being left in the swamp. For more than 3 decades, investigators pursued traditional forensic methods with limited success. Periodic reviews of the case produced no new leads. The DNA profile remained unmatched, and missing person records offered no clear connection. As time passed, the case stalled, not due to neglect, but because available techniques could not overcome the limitations of degraded remains. Despite this, the evidence was preserved, allowing for the possibility that future advancements might provide answers. That possibility became reality years later as forensic technology continued to evolve. In 2024, the New York State Police submitted the skeletal remains to a specialized forensic laboratory capable of analyzing degraded samples. Scientists developed a more comprehensive DNA profile using forensic-grade genome sequencing. This profile was used to conduct a forensic genetic genealogy search. Investigators then located a missing person report from October 1, 1976, filed in Port Jervis for a man named Nikolai Sells. DNA samples collected from his family members were analyzed in December 2025 and confirmed the match. The remains were officially identified as Nikolai Sells, who had been 76 years old at the time of his disappearance. With the identification confirmed, investigators reopened inquiries into the circumstances surrounding Sells' disappearance and death. While no arrest has been made, the case shifted from unidentified remains to an active investigation with a known victim. Authorities continue to seek information that could explain how and why Sells ended up in the swamp. The identification marked a critical step forward, restoring a name after decades of uncertainty and allowing investigators to focus on unresolved questions that remain at the center of the case. Case 6. DeAndre Nathaniel Walnuts and Yoel Baez Canons, Florida. 2 violent deaths, separated by years and circumstances, shared a similar outcome. In both cases, initial investigations stalled, leads ran dry, and families waited for answers that did not come quickly. One involved a teenager killed at a party in 2007. The other centered on a fatal shooting in 2022. For years, neither case reached a clear conclusion. It was not until a renewed focus on unresolved crimes that both files moved forward, bringing delay. But definitive outcomes. On June 24, 2007, 17-year-old DeAndre Nathaniel Walnuts was fatally stabbed in the chest during a party at a house on Ivy Lane in Florida. Law enforcement responded to reports of a disturbance, but by the time officers arrived, Walnuts had suffered a fatal injury. Interviews were conducted, and evidence was collected, but conflicting accounts and a lack of cooperation limited progress. Months passed without a clear suspect, and the case went cold. Years later, on February 23, 2022, Yoel Baez Canons was shot multiple times near Indian Point Circle. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Despite investigative efforts, that case also stalled, leaving both deaths unresolved. Both victims were connected to social settings that shaped early assumptions. Walnuts was attending a house party when a fight broke out, placing the incident within a chaotic environment involving multiple witnesses and shifting narratives. Investigators struggled to separate rumor from fact. Canons's shooting occurred in a neighborhood setting, raising questions about personal disputes or criminal activity. In both cases, detectives examined the victims, associations, movements, and potential conflicts. However, without strong physical evidence or reliable testimony, neither investigation advanced far enough to reach a legal conclusion during the initial stages. In October 2024, a newly formed cold case program reopened both investigations. Detectives re-examined files, reviewed prior interviews, and recontacted individuals who had been present or nearby at the time of each incident. Advances in investigative methods and a fresh review of old information allowed authorities to identify gaps and overlooked details. In the Walnuts case, investigators located and interviewed a person of interest who had been present at the 2007 party. In the Cannons case, cooperation between agencies helped identify a suspect who had not previously been located. The renewed efforts produced different outcomes for each case. In the Walnuts investigation, the person of interest admitted to being involved in a physical altercation and using a knife to keep others away during the fight. Investigators determined the actions met the criteria for self-defense, and no charges were filed. In the Cannons case, authorities located 23-year-old Luis Aluvar Gonzalez with assistance from the U.S. Marshals. He was arrested and later charged with first-degree manslaughter with a weapon and first-degree robbery with a firearm. The arrest marked the first major breakthrough in that investigation. For the families, the resolutions brought different forms of closure. Walnut's mother stated that after 18 years, understanding what happened allowed her to stop reliving unanswered questions. In the Cannons case, the filing of charges moved the case into the court system, offering a path toward accountability. While neither outcome changed the loss experienced by the families, both cases reached definitive conclusions. Through renewed investigation, authorities resolved two long-standing files that had remained unanswered for years. Case 7, Juanita Francisco, California, 2010. In November 2010, just days before Thanksgiving, a routine morning at a neighborhood bakery in Bakersfield, California, ended in violence. The owner of the business failed to respond as expected, prompting concern from those familiar with her daily routine. When authorities entered the bakery, they found evidence of a brutal attack. With no immediate suspect and few answers, the discovery marked the beginning of a case that would remain unresolved for years. Juanita Francisco, age 49, was found inside a back room of La Espiga Bakery on Union Street. She had suffered fatal injuries consistent with a violent assault, and the bakery showed signs of being ransacked. Investigators determined that the attack likely occurred while the business was open, suggesting the perpetrator entered during normal operations. Law enforcement secured the scene and collected physical evidence, including biological material believed to belong to the attacker. Despite these efforts, no immediate suspect was identified, and the motive for the attack remained unclear. Francisco was a longtime business owner and a well-known figure in the surrounding community. She was a mother of 3 and had operated the bakery for years, building close relationships with customers and neighbors. Community members described her as approachable and dependable, someone who spent long hours at the bakery and was often alone during early morning work. Her visibility and routine became focal points for investigators, who examined whether she had been targeted or encountered the assailant during regular business activity. Public concern remained high as the investigation continued without resolution. An STR-DNA profile was developed from evidence collected at the scene and entered into law enforcement databases. At the time, the profile did not match any known individual. Investigators conducted interviews, reviewed potential leads, and re-examined the case periodically, but no suspect could be identified. As years passed, the investigation slowed due to the absence of new evidence. Despite this, the case was never closed, and the evidence remained preserved in anticipation of future forensic advancements. In 2025, the Kern County Sheriff's Office partnered with a specialized forensic laboratory to reanalyze the preserved evidence using advanced DNA sequencing techniques. Scientists employed forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a more detailed DNA profile of the unknown suspect. This profile was then used for forensic genetic genealogy analysis in an effort to identify potential relatives and generate new investigative leads. The renewed testing marked the first significant development in the case since the original investigation stalled. As of the latest update, no arrest has been made in Juanita Francisco's case. However, the investigation remains active, with detectives continuing to evaluate genealogical leads produced through advanced DNA analysis. Authorities have encouraged anyone with information related to the crime to come forward. While the case has not yet reached the courtroom, the renewed forensic efforts represent a critical step toward identifying the person responsible and resolving a crime that has remained unanswered for more than a decade. Case 8, Baby Moses Washington, Albany, 1997. On the morning of September 7, 1997, routine maintenance work in a public park in Albany, New York, led to a discovery that immediately alarmed authorities. What initially appeared to be discarded trash near a flower bed quickly revealed something far more serious. Inside a partially burned bag lay the body of a newborn infant. With no witnesses and no identification, the discovery launched an investigation that would remain unresolved for decades. Park employees were installing an irrigation line near the Moses Monument in Washington Park when one worker noticed a blue pillowcase or laundry bag that seemed out of place. The bag was partially burned, with several spent wooden matches scattered nearby. When the worker gently moved the bag with a shovel, the body of an infant fell onto the ground, lying face down in the flower bed. Police responded immediately and secured the area. Investigators observed scorch marks on the wrapping and on the infant's head, neck, and back, indicating an attempt had been made to burn either the body or the covering. The scene suggested deliberate actions rather than an accident. A medical examination determined that the infant had been born alive and was otherwise healthy at birth. The umbilical cord was still attached, indicating the baby was less than 12 hours old at the time of death. There were no signs of illness or congenital issues. The medical examiner concluded that suffocation or smothering was the likely cause of death. The findings confirmed that the infant had been intentionally killed shortly after birth. With no identifying information and no immediate link to a parent, the child entered records as an unidentified victim, later given the name Moses Washington for burial. Investigators canvassed the surrounding neighborhood, searched nearby trash receptacles, and contacted hospitals, clinics, schools, and colleges to identify anyone who may have recently given birth. They reviewed medical records and followed tips from the public, but no suspect emerged. At the time, DNA technology was limited, and evidence collected at the scene could not produce actionable results. As weeks turned into months, leads diminished. Eventually, the case went cold, and the infant was buried in Washington Park under a headstone bearing the name Moses Washington, a reminder of unanswered questions. In 2020, investigators revisiting cold cases identified the preserved evidence as a candidate for renewed forensic testing. By 2022, specialists were able to extract a viable DNA profile. That profile was later linked through genetic databases to a relative, providing the first significant lead. The investigation narrowed to a family connected to rural Delaware County and eventually focused on Carrie S. Massacre, who had been living in the Albany area in 1997. DNA collected from discarded items outside her residence confirmed that she was the biological mother of the infant. Massacre was arrested in September 2024. She later confessed to suffocating the newborn shortly after birth and attempting to burn the body. The biological father was identified, but determined to have had no knowledge of the pregnancy and was cleared of involvement. In February 2025, Massacre entered a guilty plea to charges related to the death and evidence tampering. She was sentenced in April 2025 to 25 years in state prison, followed by post-release supervision. With the sentencing, the case that began in a city park nearly 3 decades earlier was formally concluded. Case 9, Brian Watson, Massachusetts/New Hampshire, 1984. In the summer of 1984, a young man from South Boston vanished without explanation. Days passed with no contact, no sightings, and no indication of where he had gone. What began as a missing person case slowly evolved into something far more serious. 2 months later, the discovery of a body along a New Hampshire highway confirmed that the disappearance had ended in violence, beginning a case that would remain unresolved for decades. Brian Watson was reported missing on July 28, 1984, after his family grew increasingly concerned by his sudden absence. Watson, who was 23 years old at the time, had failed to return home or reach out to relatives for more than a week. This lack of communication was unusual and immediately raised concern. Once the report was filed, police began reviewing his last known movements and contacts. With limited information and no clear signs of distress prior to his disappearance, the case was initially treated as a missing adult investigation, though investigators noted the circumstances were troubling. Watson had grown up in South Boston, where he remained closely connected to his family. His mother, alarmed by the silence, became the driving force behind the missing person report. Detectives spoke with relatives, friends, and acquaintances to determine when he was last seen and who he may have been with. They canvassed locations Watson was known to frequent and attempted to establish whether he had been involved in any disputes or risky activities. Despite these efforts, no solid leads emerged. The lack of information limited early progress and left the investigation without direction. On September 16, 1984, a motorist traveling along Interstate 93 South near Manchester, New Hampshire, discovered a body approximately 40 feet off the roadway. Authorities responded and initiated a joint investigation involving New Hampshire State Police, Manchester Police, Boston Police, and federal agencies. Dental records were used to identify the remains as Brian Watson. A medical examination determined that he had been shot. The finding confirmed that his death was the result of a deliberate act, shifting the case from a missing person inquiry to a homicide investigation spanning multiple jurisdictions. For years, investigators reviewed evidence, conducted interviews, and followed leads across state lines. Despite sustained efforts, no arrests were made. Around 2009, a promising development emerged, but the information was not sufficient to support charges. As the investigation continued, authorities explored connections to criminal activity in South Boston. Eventually, information surfaced linking the case to a dispute involving illegal substances. A witness later came forward stating that Michael Lewis had admitted to killing Watson. Investigators corroborated the account through additional evidence, providing the foundation needed to move forward. On May 27, 2022, a grand jury returned a first-degree murder indictment against Michael Lewis, who was 61 years old at the time. Prosecutors alleged that in July 1984, Lewis shot Watson while the two were in a vehicle in South Boston and later disposed of his body in New Hampshire. In November 2025, Lewis pleaded guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter, including Watson's case. He was sentenced to 2 concurrent 15-year prison terms. With the plea, the case that had remained open for more than 40 years was formally closed. Case 10, Kirk Ryan Kimberly, California, 2016. On October 17, 2016, an 18-year-old man left his home in Cotati, California, riding his bicycle to meet a friend. He never returned. When hours passed without contact, concern began to grow. Days later, the absence could no longer be explained as routine. What started as a missing person case would eventually become a homicide investigation, one that took years to resolve and permanently altered the lives of those searching for answers. Kirk Ryan Kimberly was reported missing 2 days after he was last seen. He had departed his home riding a white Cannondale mountain bike, telling family members he planned to meet someone. When he failed to return that evening and did not respond to calls or messages, his father contacted authorities. Law enforcement began tracing his last known movements, interviewing friends, and checking locations he was known to visit. Despite early search efforts, no immediate clues explained where Kirk had gone or why communication had stopped so abruptly. Kimberly had recently graduated from high school and was beginning adulthood. He practiced jiu-jitsu, rode dirt bikes competitively, and spent time outdoors with family. He was also involved in scuba diving and had plans to start work at a machine shop. Investigators examined his social circle, routines, and recent interactions to determine whether his disappearance was random or targeted. There was no indication of ng conflict or risky behavior that immediately explained his disappearance. As time passed, the lack of progress increased concern that his absence was not voluntary. On November 2, 2016, a landscaper working near Sonoma State University discovered a body in a wooded area known as the Badlands. The location was approximately 200 yards from a campus parking lot. Authorities responded and identified the remains as Kirk Kimberly. An autopsy determined he had died from multiple stab wounds. The discovery confirmed that he had been the victim of a violent crime. Investigators determined the killing was targeted rather than random, prompting an expanded investigation into individuals connected to him. Detectives conducted more than 100 interviews and collected physical and digital evidence. Cell phone GPS data became a critical component of the investigation. Records placed Daniel Carrillo, a former high school classmate of Kimberly, at the Sonoma State University campus at the time of the killing. The data narrowed the suspect pool significantly. On February 28, 2020, Carrillo was arrested while being transferred from a youth facility. The arrest marked the first major breakthrough in the case, though legal proceedings would continue for several years. Carrillo was initially tried, but a mistrial was declared due to issues involving forensic testing conducted by a laboratory later found to have flawed practices. In February 2025, following a retrial, Carrillo was convicted of first-degree murder. In June 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. With the conviction, the nearly 9-year investigation reached its conclusion, bringing legal resolution to a case that began with a young man leaving home and never returning.
Dover, Delaware, had always been known for its calm streets, tight-knit community, and the gentle rhythm of coastal life. It was a place where neighbors knew each other by name, where summer barbecues and local fairs brought everyone together, and where the sense of safety felt like an unspoken promise. Madison Turner, a bright, kind-hearted young woman, had been a part of this community for as long as anyone could remember. She was the kind of person who would stop to help a stray dog, volunteer at local shelters, and lend a hand to anyone in need without hesitation. Her dream of opening an animal sanctuary had become a shared hope for many in the town, a testament to her compassion and unwavering kindness. But that comforting image of Dover shattered one fateful day when news of Madison's tragic end rippled through the community like a cold, unforgiving wave. People who once felt secure in their small town were now haunted by the reality that even the kindest souls were not immune to the darkness that could creep into their lives. The shock of her death left a scar on Dover, a painful reminder that even the most peaceful places could harbor unimaginable horror. Madison Turner was born on October 30, 2001, in the heart of Dover, Delaware. From a young age, she developed a natural instinct for caring, a trait that only deepened as she took on the role of a second mother to her younger sisters, both of whom faced significant health challenges. Their needs became her priority, shaping her into a patient, empathetic, and selfless individual. This sense of responsibility extended beyond her family, as she often volunteered at local shelters and rescued injured animals, dreaming of one day opening a sanctuary where every stray could find a safe, loving home. Her academic journey mirrored this compassion. Madison pursued a nursing degree at the University of Delaware, determined to make a difference in the lives of those around her. She became known not just for her sharp mind but for the genuine warmth she brought to every interaction. It was during her senior year of high school that she met Ethan Collins, a charismatic, athletic young man who seemed to share her passion for community and compassion. Their connection felt like a natural fit at first, a pairing that her friends and family hoped would only add to the brightness of her future. But as the years went by, the relationship that once seemed promising began to cast long shadows over Madison's once vibrant world. Ethan Collins was born on February 9, 2000, into a strict, religious family that valued discipline, order, and unwavering faith above all else. Raised in a household where obedience was expected without question, Ethan learned early on to present a polished, disciplined exterior. He excelled in both academics and athletics throughout high school, quickly earning a reputation as a standout student and a dedicated athlete. Teachers praised his focus, coaches admired his drive, and his peers respected his quiet confidence. He seemed to have a bright future ahead, a young man destined for success. When Ethan first met Madison during her senior year, their connection seemed almost storybook perfect. He charmed her with thoughtful gestures and unwavering attention, creating the impression of a supportive, caring partner. Friends often saw them together, sharing quiet moments at local cafes, walking along the scenic Dover coastline, and cheering at each other's events. At first glance, Ethan appeared to be the kind of partner every parent hopes their child will find: attentive, reliable, and deeply invested in the relationship. But beneath this polished exterior, a darker side slowly emerged. Ethan's attentiveness began to blur into possessiveness. He started insisting on knowing her every move, framing his demands as a form of protection. He would subtly question her friendships, express discomfort over harmless conversations, and grow tense whenever she seemed too independent. Madison, always eager to see the best in people, initially interpreted his behavior as deep, protective love. But these early signs of control would soon become the cracks that revealed a much more dangerous reality. In the early days of their relationship, Ethan's possessiveness was easy to overlook, masked as deep care and genuine concern. He would often ask Madison who she was spending time with, gently pressing her for details about her friends and their conversations. At first, she found this attentiveness endearing, a sign that he truly valued their bond. But over time, his questions grew sharper, his tone more demanding, and his grip on her life tighter. He began to limit her interactions, subtly suggesting that certain friends were a bad influence or that they didn't truly care for her like he did. He framed his growing jealousy as a form of fierce protection, insisting that he only wanted to keep her safe. The first time his temper truly flared, it caught Madison off guard. What started as a minor disagreement over a missed text quickly escalated into a shouting match. Ethan grabbed her wrist, his face inches from hers, eyes dark with a rage she hadn't seen before. He released her just as quickly, his expression softening as he pulled her into a tight, almost desperate embrace, whispering apologies and promises that it would never happen again. Shaken but hopeful, Madison chose to believe him, convincing herself that his intensity was a reflection of his deep love. As the months passed, Madison found herself slowly withdrawing from her circle of friends. She skipped gatherings, ignored calls, and pulled back from the supportive network she once leaned on. Ethan's influence grew stronger, his control more absolute, as he subtly but steadily isolated her. At social events, he would cling to her side, his silent, watchful eyes warning others not to get too close. Friends began to notice her growing quietness, her nervous glances, and the way Ethan's mood seemed to dictate her every move. They tried to reach out, gently expressing their concerns, but Madison, trapped in the fog of emotional manipulation, pushed them away, convinced that Ethan's love, though intense, was still love. But the cracks in their relationship were widening, and the darkness that Ethan carried was becoming impossible to ignore. Madison had hoped that a short trip to Richmond, Virginia, might rekindle the warmth that had once defined her relationship with Ethan. She convinced herself that a change of scenery could help them reconnect, away from the growing tensions that had crept into their lives. They arrived in the vibrant, historic city on a Friday evening, the skyline shimmering as they crossed the James River, but the atmosphere in the car was thick with unspoken words and unaddressed fears. Madison clutched her phone a little tighter, her heart heavy with an unshakable sense of dread. Their first night out, they stopped by a busy downtown bar for drinks. Madison's polite exchange with a friendly waiter over their drink choices set Ethan on edge. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he watched the brief interaction. When the waiter walked away, Ethan leaned in, his voice low and sharp. "Why did you have to smile at him like that? Are you trying to embarrass me?" Madison's cheeks flushed with confusion and embarrassment as she tried to defuse the sudden outburst, whispering that it was just small talk, nothing more. But Ethan's temper was already spiraling, his voice rising above the bar's background chatter, drawing the curious glances of nearby patrons. Madison's attempts to calm him only seemed to fuel his anger, and they left the bar abruptly, the air around them thick with simmering resentment. Once inside the car, Ethan's fury boiled over. He locked the doors, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Madison reached for the handle, her breath quickening as panic set in, but Ethan's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with brutal force. His words blurred into a harsh, accusing tirade, each syllable laced with venom. She twisted in her seat, desperately trying to free herself, but Ethan's grip tightened, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. She managed to scream, the sound raw and desperate, and in that terrifying moment, Ethan's mother, who had been trying to reach him, heard the chaos through the car's still-connected Bluetooth. As Madison's screams echoed through the phone, Ethan's mother, alarmed and unsure of what she had just heard, quickly dialed 911, setting into motion a chain of events that would unravel the life Madison had fought so hard to hold onto. The tragedy that unfolded in Richmond could have been prevented if the systems meant to protect victims had not failed Madison so profoundly. Ethan's violent tendencies were not new to the authorities. He had been arrested months earlier for an assault involving a former girlfriend, a case that should have set off alarm bells about his escalating behavior. Yet, despite his history, Ethan was granted bail, released back into the community with little more than a stern warning to stay away from his previous victim. The judge had cited his lack of prior felony convictions and strong family support as reasons for the leniency, overlooking the clear pattern of control and aggression that marked his relationships. Adding to this failure was the malfunction of Ethan's GPS ankle monitor. It had been part of his conditional release, meant to ensure he posed no further threat, but the device had stopped transmitting signals weeks before the Richmond trip. The malfunction went unnoticed, slipping through the cracks of an overburdened system where technological glitches and human oversight often collide. Madison had no idea that the person she feared most had been roaming freely, unchecked and unmonitored, despite the court's supposed safeguards. When the news of Madison's death reached the public, outrage spread like wildfire. Community members demanded answers, furious that a young woman with so much promise had been left unprotected by a system that claimed to prioritize safety. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, and petitions quickly gathered thousands of signatures, calling for stricter bail requirements, better monitoring technology, and more rigorous oversight of violent offenders. For many, Madison's story became a painful symbol of the price paid when the cracks in the justice system go unaddressed, a tragic reminder that sometimes the laws meant to protect can instead pave the way for unimaginable loss. In the wake of Madison's tragic death, her family chose to honor her memory in a way that reflected her deep compassion and unwavering kindness. They established the Madison Turner Animal Welfare Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating abandoned animals, a cause that had always been close to her heart. Friends and supporters poured their grief into this effort, transforming their sorrow into something meaningful, a way to keep Madison's gentle spirit alive even in the shadow of such profound loss. Ethan, meanwhile, faced the full weight of the law. He was charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder, his once promising future shattered by his own violent choices. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom became a battleground not just for justice but for a broader conversation about the systemic failures that had allowed him to remain free. Advocates called for stronger protections for domestic violence victims, pushing for reforms that would prevent similar tragedies in the future. Madison's story now serves as a powerful, heartbreaking reminder of the devastating consequences of ignoring the early signs of abuse. It is a cautionary tale for those who find themselves in controlling, dangerous relationships, a plea for intervention before it is too late. Madison Turner's tragic story is a painful reminder of how even the kindest, most loving souls can find themselves trapped in the dark grip of an abusive relationship. Her life, once filled with dreams of helping others and creating a sanctuary for abandoned animals, was cut short by the very person she once trusted. Her loss echoes through the hearts of those who loved her, a bright light extinguished by the violent, controlling behavior of someone who claimed to care for her. For those watching, this story is not just a retelling of a tragedy, but a call to action. If you or someone you know is experiencing the warning signs of a toxic relationship, control, isolation, emotional manipulation, or physical aggression, please reach out for help. Speak up, intervene, and support those at risk before the shadows of abuse can take hold. Thank you for watching and supporting this channel. If Madison's story has moved you, please consider subscribing for more true stories that shine a light on the unseen struggles faced by so many. Together, we can help raise awareness and work towards a world where every voice is heard and every life is valued. A 2-year-old girl cries in her mother's arms, begging not to go. She knows what's waiting behind that door: pain, fear, and someone who doesn't love her. But the court said she had to go. So her mother lets her go. And that was the last time she ever saw her daughter alive. This is the story of Lily Lynette Furno, an innocent child failed by the very people meant to protect her. This is not just a story of murder. It's a story of ignored warnings, systemic failure, and a mother's worst nightmare becoming real. Hey, I'm Sunny, and I need you to brace yourself. This story shattered me. Not just because of what happened to Lily, but because of everything that led up to it. I've covered a lot of true crime. But this made me feel something different. Rage. Sadness. Guilt, like I was watching a train crash in slow motion and couldn't stop it. Lily was just a baby. And her mother, Lauren, tried everything to save her. But the system, the judge, the lawyer, the silence, kept pushing her back. This isn't just about one monster in a house. It's about how cruelty hides behind paperwork. So if you're here today, thank you for bearing witness. Let's remember Lily. And let's talk about how justice failed her, again and again. Lily was the kind of child who could brighten a whole room just by walking into it. She had wide, soulful eyes, a laugh that bubbled up from her belly, and a love for music that showed in the way she twirled around the living room singing to her favorite shows. Her bond with her mother, Lauren, was undeniable. They were inseparable, a team of two, building a life full of warmth and bedtime songs. From the very beginning, Lauren poured every ounce of her love into raising Lily. She was the center of her world. But that world had complications. Lauren and Lily's father, Jeff, had separated even before Lily was born. Their relationship was rocky, and the breakup left a trail of unfinished conversations and unresolved emotions. It wasn't long before they found themselves in court, fighting over custody of their baby girl. And that's where the real nightmare began, not with Jeff, not even with Renee, but with the man in the black robe. Judge Michael Higgins didn't hide his contempt for Lauren. He didn't want to hear her concerns or see her effort. In his courtroom, being a single mother seemed to be a mark against you. He dismissed her dedication as obsession, twisted her commitment into something unhealthy. Meanwhile, Jeff, who had just married Renee King, was seen as stable simply because he had a wife now. That's all it took. A wedding ring and a ready-made family gave him credibility. The judge didn't seem to care that Lauren was in college, working hard to give Lily a better life. He told her she should just drop out and get a job at McDonald's if she wanted to be a real mother. Renee King, Jeff's new wife, had 3 young kids of her own. She smoked. She had a history with prescription opioids. But none of that mattered to Judge Higgins. He granted Jeff and Lauren 50-50 custody, and Lily was suddenly split between 2 homes. Monday to Thursday with Jeff. Every third weekend with him too. But Jeff wasn't around much. He had work, errands, his own life. And the person left in charge of Lily most of the time? Renee. It didn't sit right with Lauren. There was something about Renee, something cold, something off. But the court had spoken. Even when expert witnesses raised red flags about Lily's emotional development, about how damaging it could be for a toddler to shuttle back and forth like this, no one listened. The judge waved it off. Lauren was left to trust a system that had already failed her. So she did the only thing she could. She documented every bruise, every scratch, every strange comment Lily made. She wrote it all down, took photos, filed it away. Because somewhere deep inside, Lauren already knew. No one else was going to protect her daughter. It started in April 2010. Lily came home from Jeff's house with a small burn mark on the back of her neck. Lauren noticed it immediately. The raw, circular shape looked eerily similar to a cigarette burn. Her heart sank. She asked Jeff about it, trying to stay calm, hoping there was a reasonable explanation. Jeff told her it was nothing, just a stray ember from a fire that landed on Lily's jacket. He said it must have gone through the fabric and burned her neck by accident. Lauren didn't believe him completely, but she wanted to. Up to that point, there hadn't been anything like this before. Still, she took a picture of the injury, saved it, and made a mental note: if anything else happens, I'm not letting it slide. But it didn't stop there. In fact, it got worse. Each time Lily came back from her father's house, there was something new: scratches across her arms, bruises on her legs, tiny welts that didn't make sense. Jeff always had a story. The dog jumped on her. The kids were playing too rough. She fell down because she's clumsy. Lauren tried to reason with it. Toddlers do fall, after all. But her gut kept screaming something else. She started to track everything: dates, times, photos, Lily's behavior. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Then one day, Lily came home with a black eye. Lauren was stunned. This wasn't just a small scrape, this was a deep, swollen bruise that looked violent. She confronted Jeff again, and once more he brushed it off. He said Lily had been in the bathroom with Renee and slipped, hitting the corner of something. Another accident. Another excuse. But by now, Lauren was running out of patience and hope. What scared Lauren even more was Lily's growing fear. The closer it got to visitation days, the more anxious Lily became. She'd cry, cling to Lauren's shirt, plead not to go. A 2-year-old shouldn't know that kind of dread. But Lily did. And Lauren was helpless. She wanted to go back to court. She wanted to show the judge everything she had collected: the photos, the timelines, the change in Lily's spirit. But when she brought it up to her attorney, he shut it down. He told her that based on how Judge Higgins had treated her before, there was a real risk she could lose custody altogether. The judge already didn't like her. If she made more noise, it might backfire. So Lauren did what no mother should have to do. She stayed silent. Terrified of the court, terrified of the outcome, terrified of losing Lily forever. She tried to make peace with the fact that 50-50 custody was better than none at all. Even if it meant sending her daughter back into the arms of someone she didn't trust. Meanwhile, Renee was spiraling. Her back injury from earlier that year had led to a prescription for painkillers. And it didn't take long for her to start abusing them. High, unstable, and overwhelmed, Renee was in no condition to care for children, especially not one she didn't see as her own. Lily wasn't her daughter. She was a responsibility. An annoyance. And every time Renee's frustration boiled over, Lily paid the price. The resentment grew. So did the injuries. One day, Lily came back with another black eye. This time, the excuse was surreal. Lauren was told Renee had fallen on Lily at a Sprint store because her hip gave out. Even more chilling, when Lauren asked Lily what happened, her daughter repeated the same story almost word for word. Renee fell on me in the Sprint store. Lily didn't even know what a Sprint store was. She was being coached. Told what to say. That was the breaking point for Lauren's family. Her mother started calling every Sprint store in the area to find out if an accident had been reported. Because when someone gets hurt in a public space, it's usually documented. But there was nothing. No reports. No witnesses. No incident logged anywhere. The lies were starting to fall apart. But the danger was growing faster than the truth. On November 18, 2010, Lily came home with bruises stretched across her tiny arms, along her ribs, and down her back. They weren't light marks. They were deep, blotchy, and unmistakably violent. Lauren stood there, frozen, staring at her daughter's body, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't clumsiness. This wasn't roughhousing. This was abuse, and Lauren knew it. Something inside her finally broke. No more doubting herself. No more waiting. No more silence. She called Renee. Her voice trembled, but her tone was firm. She asked what had happened this time, already expecting another excuse. And just like clockwork, Renee repeated the same tired line. She fell again. Then, almost as if rehearsed, Renee softened her tone and suggested they sit down soon to talk about the custody arrangement, how maybe they could find a way to work together for Lily's sake. Lauren hung up, shaking. The manipulation was so casual it was terrifying. That night, Lauren didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, eyes wide open, whispering to herself over and over, "I'm going back to court. I don't care what the judge says. I don't care what my attorney warns. I'm going to fight for my daughter. Enough is enough." But the very next day was Saturday, Jeff's weekend. Court orders couldn't be ignored. Lauren had no legal way to stop it. She told herself she'd get through the weekend and take Lily to the doctor on Monday, show the injuries, start the legal process again. She promised herself, and she promised Lily. Just get through one more visit. The morning of November 20th started quietly. Lily was staying with Lauren and her parents, and they all had breakfast together. Lily's favorite, Lucky Charms. Her grandpa made it just the way she liked, and she smiled between spoonfuls, giggling at the silly marshmallows. For a moment, it almost felt normal. But then it was time to get ready. The moment Lauren said the words, Lily's face changed. Her smile disappeared. Her tiny hands trembled. She began to cry, sobbing uncontrollably, holding on to her mother like her life depended on it. "I don't want to go," she whispered, again and again. Lauren held her, trying not to break in front of her daughter. She kissed her forehead, whispered back that everything would be okay, and that she'd see her tomorrow. The drive to the handoff spot took 45 minutes. It felt like hours. Jeff had picked a different meeting location than usual, said he was running late. When they pulled up, something felt off. Jeff was there, but distant. Cold. He stood there, waiting, barely making eye contact. Lily clung to her mother one last time, crying softly. Jeff told her, "Give your mama one more hug." She did. A tight one. And then Jeff took her by the hand and turned away. Lauren didn't know it, but that was the last time she would ever hold her daughter. Hours later, at 3:01 p.m., Lauren was standing in a Walmart aisle, picking out Christmas stocking stuffers for Lily. Her phone rang. It was Jeff. Her heart dropped the moment she saw his name. She answered, and his voice was flat. "There's been an accident. You need to get to McLaren Hospital right now." No explanation. Just those words. Panic gripped Lauren's chest. She dropped everything, shopping cart, bags, plans, and ran out of the store. Traffic was brutal. She kept calling Jeff for answers. He repeated himself. "Just get here." Then hung up. Again. And again. Finally, desperate, she called the hospital directly. "I'm Lily Furno's mom. I need to know what's going on." The nurse paused, then said, "You need to come now. We've been working on her for over an hour. She doesn't have a pulse." When Lauren arrived, Jeff was standing outside the hospital, smoking a cigarette. She ran past him, asking, "Is Lily okay?" His reply came without emotion. "No, she's not." She stopped in her tracks. "Is she alive?" Jeff looked at her and said, "No. She's not." Renee told the police she fell on Lily in the shower. She blamed her bad back, said her knees gave out, and that Lily was hurt by accident. But the doctors who examined Lily's body knew instantly that wasn't the truth. There were no signs of a single fall. What they found instead was the brutal aftermath of a sustained, violent attack. Lily had 20 separate impact injuries to her skull. Her head had been slammed into the floor over and over again. The damage was so severe, there was no way this could be anything but intentional. The reason? A tantrum. Lily didn't make it to the bathroom in time. She had an accident, like many 2-year-olds do. And for something so innocent, so normal, Renee exploded. In a fit of rage, she turned on Lily and unleashed all of her fury. But it wasn't just the blunt force trauma. The autopsy revealed something even worse. There were signs of assault. A foreign object had been used. Lily had suffered not only physical violence but something so cruel and violating it left the medical staff shaken. This wasn't a moment of lost temper. This was calculated, hateful, and sadistic. Renee had completely dehumanized Lily in her final moments. And after it was all over, she didn't call 911 right away. Instead, she cleaned up. Took time to get herself together before making the call. While Lauren was still in the hospital, still processing the words "she's not alive," she learned the details. One by one, the facts poured in from the doctors, from the nurses, from investigators. Each one hitting her like a new blow to the chest. She collapsed in disbelief. Her baby. Gone. And in such a horrific, unforgivable way. That same day, police arrested Renee. She was charged with felony murder. The evidence was overwhelming. But even as handcuffs clicked around Renee's wrists, Lauren couldn't feel relief. All she felt was emptiness. Guilt. She thought about the photos she had taken. The black eyes, the bruises. She thought about her attorney's voice, telling her not to go back to court. She thought about the judge who made her feel small and irrational, who treated her like an enemy instead of a mother trying to protect her child. All those moments, when she stayed quiet out of fear, now screamed back at her. She walked into her home, and it felt cold. Foreign. Wrong. The toys were still there. The little pink socks still folded in the laundry basket. But Lily wasn't coming back. And without her, nothing made sense anymore. The guilt followed her from room to room. Every corner held a memory. Every memory felt like a failure. Lily had known. She had cried before every visit. She had begged not to go. And Lauren had held her close, kissed her head, and said it would be okay. But it wasn't. Lauren saw it coming, and still, she couldn't stop it. This was every mother's nightmare. But for Lauren, it was real. It unfolded step by step, day by day, while everyone told her to stay quiet. And now, the light of her life had been stolen in the most brutal way possible. All because someone else decided Lily didn't matter. All because the system didn't listen. The trial began, and the entire county erupted. Protesters lined the courthouse steps with signs demanding accountability, not just for Renee King, but for Judge Higgins as well. The judge who ignored every warning. The judge who silenced a mother trying to save her child. People were furious, heartbroken, and loud. They wanted justice, not just for Lily, but for every child failed by a broken system. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution laid everything bare. They showed the photos of Lily's bruised body. They detailed the 20 distinct impact wounds to her head. They explained how Renee waited before calling 911, how she tried to clean up the crime scene, how nothing matched the version of events she gave to police. This wasn't a fall. This was deliberate. Prolonged. Violent. Renee's defense clung to one story: it was an accident. Her back gave out. She fell. She loved Lily like her own. But no one was buying it. Not after seeing the medical evidence. Not after hearing the timeline. Not after hearing Lauren's trembling voice testify about everything she tried to do. The jury didn't take long. Renee was found guilty of murder, of abuse, of destroying a little girl's life. The sentence was final: life in prison without the possibility of parole. In a final act of cruelty, Renee asked to attend Lily's funeral. She wanted to stand among the people mourning the child she had killed. The court denied her request. Lauren stood before the courtroom and delivered a victim impact statement that left the room in silence. She said, "You don't get to see my daughter's firsts, neither do I. No first day of school. No first date. No prom. No wedding. You took that from both of us." Judge Higgins eventually issued a cold, detached public statement. He offered sympathy but denied any responsibility. Claimed no formal custody concerns had been raised. Ignored everything that had led to Lily's death. But the public didn't forget. Petitions circulated. Rallies grew louder. People demanded he be removed, but judges are hard to unseat. Removal requires votes, time, and pressure. And while the outrage burned hot, the system moved slow. Lauren filed official complaints. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. This case still echoes in my mind. Not just because Lily died, but because it could have been stopped. Lauren did everything right. She documented, she questioned, she begged. But fear kept her from going back to court, and that fear was created by the system itself. Judges are supposed to protect children. Instead, Lily was handed back to the woman who would kill her. And now, Lauren lives every day with the weight of what-ifs. But she also chose to fight back, not with rage, but with purpose. Justice for Lily became her mission. She's helping other children, raising awareness, saving lives. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Comment below. Share her name. Speak up when you see something wrong. Because Lily mattered. And every child like her deserves to be seen, protected, and loved. I'm Sunny, and I'll see you in the next one.
On December 1st, 1988, authorities were called to a remote construction site in Beaverton, Oregon, after reports of a suspicious vehicle abandoned near the woods. The car had no license plates, frosted windows, and the driver's side window left open. The keys were still inside. It was the trunk, however, that told the darkest part of the story. Inside lay the body of 30-year-old Deborah Atropos, a secretary and bookkeeper. Dressed in a blue coat and black heels, now soaked and caked in mud. Investigators also found mud smeared on the car's hood, gear shift, steering wheel, and the front right tire. Deborah had been making plans to leave her husband, Robert Elmer Atropos. Their marriage had lasted just over a year, but was marked by escalating abuse. Friends and coworkers reported witnessing bruises and emotional distress. Deborah had recently begun a new relationship and confided in friends that Robert had confronted her and threatened her life. On November 29th, 2 days before she was found, Deborah left work in Sherwood for a hair appointment in Tualatin. She left the salon around 7 p.m., intending to pick up her daughter from Robert's home. She never made it. That night, Robert called family members and even 911, claiming Deborah was missing. But investigators quickly noted inconsistencies. He said he made the calls from home, but there was no record of them from his landline. Despite early suspicions, the lack of physical evidence forced the case to go cold. Friends continued to point toward Robert, but time moved on, and the trail faded. More than 30 years later, in 2020, cold case detective Kevin Winfield took a fresh look. He ordered forensic analysis on Deborah's clothing and the mud from the original crime scene. DNA found on her coat matched Robert Atropos. Soil samples from the abandoned vehicle also matched mud from Robert's home. Investigators also discovered that Robert had worked at construction sites near where her body was found. In a 2022 interview, Robert gave conflicting accounts compared to his 1988 statements. On March 23, 2023, Robert was indicted by a grand jury and arrested for second-degree murder. During the April 2025 trial, his defense argued the DNA results were inconclusive and too technical for a jury to fully understand. They claimed the presence of his DNA on Deborah's coat could be explained by their prior relationship. but prosecutors pointed to his motive, the inconsistencies in his statements, and the forensic match between mud samples. After a 3-week trial, the jury deliberated for less than a day. On April 17, 2025, Robert Atropos, now 70, was found guilty of killing Deborah in 1988. Sentencing is scheduled for July. The case became a symbol of justice, long delayed but not denied. It also underscored how domestic violence, once hidden in plain sight, can become a cold case that waits silently for science and perseverance to bring truth to light. On January 7, 1999, 17-year-old high school student Nancy Noga left her part-time job at the rag shop in Old Bridge, New Jersey, around 6 p.m. It was a short, familiar walk home, just 15 minutes, but Nancy never made it back. That same evening, her family reported her missing to the Sayreville Police Department, and a search began immediately. 5 days later, on January 12th, a man walking his dog discovered Nancy's body in a wooded area behind a strip mall near Ernston Road, not far from her home. Her remains were found fully clothed, wearing a purple Arizona jacket, jeans, and a sweater. The ground was frozen, and so was her body. The medical examiner later determined that she had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Investigators also found evidence that she had been indecently assaulted. A tree limb was believed to be the weapon used to take her life. Early suspicions pointed towards someone familiar to Nancy. She was known to be cautious and unlikely to follow a stranger. A sketch circulated of a man seen in the area, but it led nowhere. The case eventually went cold. In 2021, 2 decades after the murder, investigators used DNA collected from Nancy's body and clothing to identify a suspect, Bruce Salmonsky, then 26, who lived near where Nancy worked. Genetic genealogy, with the help of Parabon Nanolabs, played a key role in the breakthrough. Salmonsky's wife had worked at a nearby Kmart, close to Nancy's walking route. Salmonsky was arrested in August 2021. At his trial in 2024, he pleaded not guilty. His defense attorney argued there was no physical evidence placing him at the crime scene beyond the DNA. He questioned whether Nancy had truly been kidnapped or sexually assaulted, and he challenged the idea that DNA alone could prove guilt. He pointed out that Nancy had been struck from the front and that the perpetrator was believed to be left-handed, while Salmonsky is right-handed. But the prosecution presented a compelling narrative. Assistant prosecutor Katie Mae McGee stated that Nancy was taken off her usual path into the woods, a place no one would voluntarily walk at night. She emphasized that DNA from a male source was found both inside Nancy and on the left side of her underwear. That DNA matched Salmonsky. The prosecution argued that the presence of his DNA was proof that he was the one who attacked and killed her. In October 2024, after a 3-week trial, Bruce Salmonsky was found guilty of all charges, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and aggravated sexual assault. On March 17, 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison with no parole eligibility for 30 years, plus additional consecutive terms. Nancy's family finally had answers, but the emotional scars remained. Friends recalled the fear that gripped the town after her body was found. The case had haunted the community for over 2 decades, a chilling reminder of how one violent act could destroy so many lives. Now, justice had arrived, delayed but not denied. On August 9, 2004, an unconscious man was discovered on a sidewalk near 3rd Avenue and Madison Street in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. Emergency responders transported him to St. Joseph's Hospital, where he died 8 days later from heat exposure. He carried no identification, and efforts to identify him through fingerprints and the National DNA Database yielded no matches. For nearly 2 decades, his case remained open, the man known only as John Doe. In September 2024, the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office reached out to Ramapo College's Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center in Mahwah, New Jersey. The case was assigned to the center's student team and faculty, who sent a preserved blood stain to Genelog, a genome sequencing facility in Georgia. Genelog successfully extracted usable DNA, which was passed on to Paraben Nano Labs for analysis. Undergraduate students in the genealogy course began building family trees using the extracted DNA. Though the semester ended before they could complete the task, the project was taken over by full-time staff. Within days, they identified two third cousins, which led them to the likely identity of the John Doe, John Thellison, a man who had gone missing from Toledo, Ohio, in 2004. His identity was officially confirmed in March 2025 by senior medical legal investigator Kristen Edgars. John had a history of mental illness and had last contacted his sister, stating he was planning to jump into a river to cleanse himself. He vanished shortly afterward. With the help of the Arizona Attorney General's Cold Case Unit, the case was finally resolved. The confirmation brought long-awaited answers to his surviving family members, ending years of uncertainty. This case marked another milestone in the growing role of genetic genealogy in modern forensics. From students in a classroom to professional labs across the country, the collaboration demonstrated how dedication, technology, and education could come together to bring closure, even when justice itself is no longer possible.
On the morning of April 4, 2024, at Isla Sombra Resort, a housekeeper knocked twice before entering Suite 306, the honeymoon suite. What she found would shatter the resort's illusion of peace. Blood soaked the bed sheets. A man's lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor, his throat grotesquely slashed. Shards of glass glinted across the carpet. The victim was soon identified as Julian Wolfe, a 40-year-old American corporate attorney. He and his new bride, Lena Wolfe, had checked in just 3 nights earlier. But now she was missing. Her passport, clothes, and phone were gone. There was no sign of forced entry. Resort staff recalled seeing them laughing by the pool the night before. Security footage showed Julian returning to the suite alone around midnight. But after that, nothing. As local police sealed off the suite and began their forensic sweep, whispers spread across the resort grounds. Guests were told it was a medical emergency, but rumors of murder rippled through the hallways. Reporters started arriving before sundown. Julian's family, notified in New York, were stunned. Lena's family couldn't be reached. What was meant to be a week of romance had turned into a brutal crime scene. And the woman who was supposed to be asleep beside him in that bed was now the prime question: missing, hidden, or on the run? In Manhattan, Julian and Lena Wolfe were the kind of couple people noticed. He was polished, articulate, and respected. A corporate attorney with a corner office and high-profile clients. She was striking, magnetic, and unpredictable. A travel photographer whose Instagram bristled with sensual self-portraits from Morocco to Montenegro. They looked unstoppable. But behind the curated photos and charity gala appearances, something colder lingered. Julian, though loyal in public, had begun a quiet affair with his assistant, a younger woman who idolized his confidence and power. It wasn't love, it was control. Lena, on the other hand, wasn't blind. She sensed the emotional distance creeping into their bedroom. Julian's touch became mechanical. Conversations turned to silence. While he buried himself in work, she sought out excitement, not always through other people, but through risk, travel, and teasing the boundaries of fidelity. She flirted recklessly at gallery openings, often photographed herself in hotel mirrors wearing nothing but silk robes, knowing Julian rarely looked anymore. They had money, beauty, and status, but lacked the one thing they needed most: intimacy. Friends thought they were living the dream, but in truth, they were too attractive. Strangers orbiting each other out of habit. Their decision to marry was impulsive, perhaps a last attempt to fix something already broken. A tropical honeymoon was meant to reignite passion, to reset. But all it did was expose how far apart they'd really drifted. Rafael Cruz was the kind of man women remembered. Tall, lean, with sun-warmed skin and eyes that held secrets darker than the sea he swam in daily. At 36, he had the rugged charm of someone who lived outside the rules, a diving instructor who knew every coral ridge around Isla Sombra, but also knew how to read people, especially lonely women. When Lena arrived on a solo photo assignment, months before her wedding, Rafael was the first person she met on the beach. Their connection was instant, unspoken, and electric. What started as a flirtatious dive lesson quickly spiraled into stolen kisses under the dock, then hotel room. Encounters that blurred the line between passion and recklessness. For Lena, it was escape, a fantasy. For Rafael, it was something else entirely. He wasn't just intoxicated by her body, he was consumed by her presence. He began watching her through the slats of her villa, texting her at all hours, telling her he couldn't breathe without her. Lena dismissed it as island drama, something she'd leave behind. But Rafael couldn't be left. When she told him she was engaged, he smiled like it was a joke. When she said she couldn't see him again, he whispered that she already belonged to him. It wasn't love. It was possession. And Lena, blinded by the thrill, didn't see the danger in his gaze, not until it was far too late. When Julian and Lena landed on Isla Sombra for their honeymoon, the sun was shining, the champagne was cold, and everything looked perfect. But the warmth between them had already faded. Julian tried to pretend, placing his hand gently on her thigh at dinner, arranging excursions, booking spa treatments. But Lena barely responded. Her eyes were always elsewhere, more specifically, on her phone. Every chance she got, she slipped away under the guise of needing fresh air, just to text Rafael. His messages came fast and hard, dripping with need. And barely contained obsession. Julian noticed the shift. He wasn't stupid. On their second night, he left her in the suite, walked down to the beach bar, and started drinking rum neat. That's where he met Sierra, a sultry bartender with sharp wit and soft curves. She listened, leaned in, and laughed just enough to tempt. Julian leaned forward and kissed her. It was impulsive. Just one kiss. But Lena saw it. She'd come to find him, phone still warm in her hand from Rafael's latest message. She stood in the shadows, frozen, not just with betrayal, but with a storm of guilt and fury. She turned around and didn't stop walking until she reached Rafael's bungalow. She knocked once. He opened the door shirtless, smiling as if he'd been waiting all night. She stepped inside without a word, unaware that the moment her foot crossed the threshold, her honeymoon was already over, and the nightmare was just beginning. The morning light hadn't yet touched Isla Sombra when Lena whispered the words Rafael never expected to hear. I'm going back to Julian. I can't do this. For a moment, Rafael didn't speak. His jaw tensed, his breath slowed, and then his smile vanished. What flickered in his eyes was not heartbreak. It was something far more dangerous. He stood, slowly, and told her he would drive her back. Lena hesitated, but followed. The ride was silent, his grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. The island roads twisted through thick palms and coastal cliffs, but Rafael's mind twisted harder. Every second was a scream in his head. How could she leave him after everything? At 2:05 a.m. on April 5th, he knocked on the door of Suite 306. Julian answered, bleary-eyed, shirtless, confused. What the hell was all he got out before Rafael lunged? The fight was raw, savage. Julian punched hard, but Rafael fought like an animal. Lena screamed as the two men crashed through furniture. A glass lamp shattered. Blood sprayed the walls. Then the blade appeared, small, hidden, fast. Rafael slashed Julian's throat in one violent motion. The sound was wet, horrifying. Julian collapsed instantly. blood gushing onto the tile. Lena shrieked, backing into the wall, hands trembling. Raphael turned, chest heaving, shirt soaked. He didn't speak. He just grabbed her wrist and yanked her toward the door. She resisted, sobbing, but he was stronger. They vanished into the dark island night, Julian's lifeless body behind them. The suite destroyed, the air heavy with the stench of murder. By dawn, Isla Sombre Resort was in chaos. A guest had reported. Screaming. Security entered Suite 306 and stumbled upon the horror. Julian Wolfe's mutilated body lying in a pool of blood. The suite torn apart as if a storm had passed through. The crime scene team arrived within the hour. Forensics cataloged everything. Sandy footprints leading from the balcony to the door. Shattered glass embedded in the carpet, and 2 wine glasses, one still stained with lipstick. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared stolen. The only thing missing was Lena Wolfe. Resort staff confirmed she had not checked out, and her belongings were still in the room. CCTV footage offered a chilling glimpse of what had happened. At 1:48 a.m., cameras caught Lena walking alone toward the beach. At 2:21 a.m., she was seen with Rafael Cruz, slipping through the garden path that led to his villa. That was the last anyone saw of her. Police stormed Rafael's bungalow by mid-morning. He opened the door calmly, shirtless, reeking of rum and salt. His torso bore visible scratches, red, raw, and recent. When questioned, he smiled faintly and claimed he hadn't seen Lena since the previous afternoon. His story was inconsistent. He contradicted himself on timelines, claimed he'd been alone all night, and denied ever being near the honeymoon suite. But the scratches told another story. The wine glasses. The footage. Something violent had happened, and Raphael's calm wasn't confidence, it was delusion. Beginning to crack. Lena woke to the sound of water slapping against wood and the creak of a sail swaying in the breeze. Her head pounded, her mouth was dry, and her wrists burned from tight restraints. She was lying on a narrow cot inside the cabin of Raphael's sailboat, bound hand and foot. Panic surged, but before she could scream, he appeared in the doorway, shirtless, barefoot, and smiling as if nothing were wrong. "Morning, mi amor," he said, setting down a tray of fruit and cold water beside her. "We're finally alone." Lena froze. Every word he spoke was soaked in delusion. Raphael talked to her like they were on a honeymoon of their own. He peeled mango slices and fed them to her. He told her about the life they'd build once they left Isla Sombre behind. He spoke about babies, about distant shores, about starting over. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She nodded softly, listened, played along. Because she knew the moment she fought back, he might snap again. For 48 hours, he treated her like a cherished possession, not a person. He undressed in front of her, laid beside her without touching, whispering fantasies of their future while she stared blankly at the wooden ceiling. All the while, her fingers worked the ropes, inch by inch. Slowly, quietly. She didn't know when the chance would come, only that she had to be ready when it did. The sky was still dark on April 7th when Lena heard Raphael's breathing shift, deep, uneven, and slow. He had been drinking heavily all night, rambling about destiny and soulmates before finally collapsing on the floor beside the cot. His hand twitched, a half-empty bottle rolling from his grip. This was her moment. Her wrists were raw, but the rope had loosened just enough. She held her breath and slipped one hand free, then the other. Every sound made her freeze. He didn't stir. Slowly, silently, she crept to the cabin door, barefoot and trembling, heart pounding in her chest. The deck was cold beneath her feet, the wind sharp. She looked out at the open sea, endless, black and merciless. But it was her only way out. Without a second thought, Lena climbed over the railing and dove headfirst into the water. Naked, salt stinging her skin. The current pulled hard. Waves crashed over her, choking her cries. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion. but she kept swimming, fueled by pure survival. She didn't know which direction was land, only that she had to move. Hours seemed to pass in a blur of dark water. And pain before she saw it. A distant fishing boat anchored near the shallows. She crawled toward the rocky shore nearby, collapsing face down. The fisherman found her minutes later, shivering, bruised, barely conscious. She looked up at him, with bloodshot eyes, and whispered one word, "Help." By the afternoon of April 7th, the local police moved quickly. Lena's statement, though fragmented from shock, painted a vivid and disturbing picture. Officers boarded Raphael's sailboat before he had a chance to flee. He was still there, half-dressed and hungover, wiping down the galley counter as if nothing had happened. He didn't resist arrest. When handcuffed, he looked up at the officers and smiled faintly, like they were interrupting a private moment. The forensics team swept the boat and found exactly what Lena described. Blood traces near the cabin floor, a torn piece of lace lingerie shoved under a cushion, and the same rope she'd been bound with coiled neatly beside his bed. At the station, Raphael was brought into the interrogation room. He sat casually, leaning back in the chair, one leg crossed over the other. When asked why he took Lena, why he attacked Julian, he didn't flinch. "She belonged to me," he said quietly, almost tenderly. She just didn't know it yet. The detectives exchanged glances. There was no remorse in his voice, only entitlement, delusion, control. They pressed him for details, but Raphael said little else. His obsession was so deep he didn't think he had done anything wrong. In his mind, this wasn't a crime. It was love misunderstood. The evidence was overwhelming. Raphael Cruz was formally charged with first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping. His expression didn't change. He simply asked if Lena was safe, as if that somehow proved he cared. The media frenzy ignited within hours of Raphael's arrest. News outlets from New York to London plastered the story across headlines: sex, sand, and slaughter. The combination of a luxury honeymoon, a fatal love triangle, and a beautiful missing bride-turned-survivor was irresistible. Every detail, from the blood-soaked suite to the naked ocean escape, fed the public's obsession. Lena's past surfaced almost instantly. Sensual photographs from her photography portfolio and personal social media began circulating. Commentators debated whether she was a reckless seductress or a woman caught in the claws of two powerful, unstable men. Talk shows speculated endlessly. Was it premeditated? Did she provoke Raphael? Why had she married Julian if she was in love with someone else? The narrative split the public. Some viewed her as a manipulative figure who pushed two men to madness. Others saw her as a victim of obsession, control, and emotional betrayal. Paparazzi swarmed her family home and true crime. Bloggers dissected her love life as if it were entertainment. For Lena, the nightmare hadn't ended with the escape. It had only evolved into something more public, more invasive, and just as cruel. In July 2025, Raphael Cruz stood before the court, his expression as unreadable as ever. The trial drew international attention, with reporters lined up outside the courthouse and every seat inside packed with spectators. The prosecution laid out a brutal, airtight case. DNA evidence linked him directly to the crime scene. Julian's blood on Raphael's clothing. Lena's on the boat. Surveillance footage placed him near the honeymoon suite, just minutes before Julian was killed. And then came Lena's testimony. Raw, trembling, but unwavering, she detailed the obsession, the captivity, the terror. The courtroom fell silent as she described diving naked into the sea to escape him. The defense attempted to argue diminished capacity, painting Raphael as mentally unstable and emotionally manipulated. But it didn't hold. His own words, captured in interrogation, "She belonged to me," echoed like a confession. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge, before issuing the sentence, called the case a textbook example of erotic delusion and fatal narcissism. Raphael was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion, no remorse, only a lingering gaze toward the seat where Lena had sat. After the trial, Lena vanished. She legally changed her name, booked a one-way flight to southern France, and disappeared into a quiet coastal town where no one knew her story. She stopped taking photos. Her camera, once an extension of her spirit, now felt like a weapon aimed back at her. The idea of being seen, even through a lens, became unbearable. She lived quietly, renting a small apartment above a bakery, taking odd jobs to survive. Her hair was shorter, her voice softer. The vibrant woman who once posed barefoot in foreign deserts had become a ghost wrapped in sweaters, avoiding eye contact, but the trauma never left. It showed up in dreams, in flashes of Julian's lifeless eyes staring up from blood-soaked tile. It whispered in Raphael's voice, possessive, calm, claiming love while dragging her into darkness. Some mornings, she would wake with the scent of salt water in her nose, her skin tingling as if still soaked in the cold sea. She had escaped the island, the courtroom, the cameras. But she could never fully escape what had been done, or who she'd been forced to become in order to survive. This story was never just about betrayal. It was about control hiding behind the mask of love. Julian Wolfe didn't die because his wife was unfaithful. He died because one man couldn't accept that love isn't owed, isn't owned, and isn't a weapon. Lena's choices, reckless and emotional, lit the match. But it was Raphael's delusion that poured gasoline on everything and struck the flame. He didn't love her. He wanted to possess her, to cage her under the illusion of romance. His obsession dressed itself in tenderness, but at its core was violence, entitlement, and a need to dominate. Julian became collateral in a war that had nothing to do with him. A man trying to salvage a marriage that had already started to slip through his fingers. Lena survived, but the price was a lifetime scarred by memory. Love, real love, liberates. It never takes by force. It never turns rooms into prisons or kisses into threats. The moment love demands ownership, when it stops asking and starts taking, it ceases to be love at all. It becomes something else entirely. Something deadly. On July 12, 2021, in hills of Santa Verona, where every lawn is sculpted and every window glows with curated warmth, the Calderon family was a vision of upper-class perfection. Dominic Calderon stood tall as a dominant figure in real estate, a man whose handshake could change the skyline. His wife, Elena, was the portrait of elegance, flawless makeup, designer gowns, a walking magazine spread. And then there was Leila, Elena's daughter from a previous marriage, 18, beautiful and strangely invisible in her own home. The mansion itself was a mirror of their image, spotless, cold, and far too quiet. Dominic spent his nights in his office or out sealing million-dollar deals, barely acknowledging the world inside his walls. Elena floated through the house like a queen without a court, obsessed with photo shoots, galas, and being envied. Leila moved through the hallways like she was haunting them, unseen, unheard, and untouched. But lately, something had shifted. Leila had grown into her body, and Dominic had noticed. Her hips, her poise, the subtle confidence with which she carried herself, it didn't go unnoticed. Their accidental glances started lasting a second too long. The air between them changed, thick, slow, waiting. Dominic's gaze would linger as she stretched in the sunroom, his mind wandering to places no stepfathers ever should. Leila felt it too. She wasn't naive. She saw the way his eyes followed her, the stiffness in his posture when she passed by in a towel, the pauses when she spoke and he listened with unblinking attention. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath it, under the polished floors, and behind the glass walls, something unspeakable was beginning to stir. The silence in the Calderon House wasn't new, it had simply become thicker with time. Elena and Dominic now occupied the mansion like distant tenants, passing each other in marble corridors with half-hearted nods and emotionless updates. Their shared bedroom had become a symbol of a marriage that no longer existed, so they abandoned it altogether. Dominic slept in the guest wing, Elena in her plush suite surrounded by creams, mirrors, and empty champagne flutes. Sex had disappeared years ago, a casualty of ambition and resentment. Elena coped in the way she knew best: Botox injections. That numbed her expressions, Pilates classes filled with other miserable wives, and brunches where she could pretend her life was enviable. She obsessed over appearances while ignoring the slow disintegration of everything beneath them. Meanwhile, Layla had grown bold. She no longer tiptoed like a child. Now she drifted through the house in silk camisoles that clung to her skin, often braless, always barefoot. She didn't speak much, but she didn't have to. Her presence was enough to shift the air in any room she entered. Dominic felt it every time. His eyes followed her thighs, the curve of her back, the casual sensuality she carried, like perfume. He told himself to look away, and most times he did. But not always. Layla noticed. Of course she noticed. And she didn't stop. She leaned against doorframes a second longer, let her camisole fall lower as she reached for her water bottle, sat on the kitchen counter with parted legs, just wide enough to spark something dangerous. It was all unspoken, but mutual. The tension between them was electric, coiled, forbidden, and getting harder to ignore. Every silence between them hummed with possibility, every glance a threat waiting to break. Neither dared speak it, but it lived in the spaces they shared, in the clink of ice in his bourbon, in the creak of the stairs when she passed his door at night, in the way his breath caught when she smiled just a little too slow. The heat that summer clung to everything thick, restless, and full of secrets. Late one night, the house lay asleep in stillness while Layla stepped outside to the pool. She slipped off her robe and let it fall to the ground, walking slowly into the water, completely bare. The moonlight painted her skin silver, and the ripples kissed her thighs as she swam slowly, deliberately, unashamed. From the upstairs balcony, Dominic stood hidden in the shadows, silent and motionless. He told himself to turn away. He didn't. He watched every move, every rise and dip of her body in the water, breathing heavier with each second. The next morning, over coffee, they shared something unspoken. Layla wore a soft, thin shirt with no bra beneath, her nipples faintly visible in the morning light. She smiled as she stirred her cup, and when she passed him the sugar, her fingers grazed his. He felt the spark, the warmth, and didn't move away. Their eyes met too long, too quietly. Elena walked in moments later, oblivious to what was thickening between them. She kissed Dominic on the cheek, complimented the rare ease in the room, and smiled at how close they seemed these days. Layla leaned into that lie. She began teasing more openly, making jokes with double meanings, brushing up against him in the hallway, lounging on the sofa in positions designed to tempt. Dominic tried to bury his instincts, but his self-control was wearing thin. He found excuses to be in the same room as her. He let his eyes wander. He dreamed about her at night and hated himself in the morning. They were playing with fire, and both of them knew it. Their glances had grown into moments. Their silences had grown into promises. And in the stolen seconds when Elena was gone or distracted, the air between Layla and Dominic thickened like smoke-hot, heavy, and waiting for a single spark to burn everything down. The house felt different without Elena, quieter, looser. Like a lid had been lifted off something dangerous. She had flown out for a charity gala in New York, leaving Dominic and Layla alone for the weekend. On Saturday night, Layla appeared at the door of his den with 2 glasses of wine and a smirk that didn't belong to a stepdaughter. She wore a thin black slip, bare-legged, unfiltered. "Movie night?" she asked as if it were innocent. They sat on the couch, too close. The opening credits flickered, but neither was paying attention. One glass of wine became two. Her leg brushed his once, then again. This time he didn't pull away. She leaned in to whisper something. He didn't hear the words, only felt the heat of her breath against his ear, the bare skin of her shoulder against his arm. He turned his head, their eyes locked. The space between them vanished. The kiss started as a mistake, but quickly turned hungry. Hands explored what had only been imagined. Clothes slipped off with silent urgency. They moved from the couch to the bedroom without a word, as if this moment had always been waiting. The sheets tangled around their limbs as breath and tension gave way to gasps and moans. There was nothing tender about it, just years of unspoken tension erupting in a single night of forbidden release. Afterward, they lay in the dark, barely speaking. The fan spun slowly above them, their bodies still warm from what had just happened. Dominic stared at the ceiling, guilt crawling up his chest like static. Layla traced invisible shapes on his stomach, her face unreadable. They had crossed a line no apology could fix, no silence could erase, and yet neither moved away, neither said it was over. Because beneath the shame, beneath the moral wreckage, something else lingered. Desire. Addictive, consuming, and alive. What began as a single reckless night quickly turned into ritual. Dominic and Layla could barely last a day without each other. They found new places to meet, private suites in luxury hotels, high-end motels on the edge of town, anywhere they could be alone and unseen. Layla would arrive in lace and silk, her body dressed like a fantasy, and Dominic would be waiting with trembling hands and a room paid in full. Back at home, the facade remained intact barely. Layla started sending Dominic photos late at night. Her body sprawled across satin sheets, her lips parted in a silent dare. Sometimes she was naked, sometimes in lingerie he had bought her. Dominic would respond with transfers, jewelry, promises he never thought he'd make. He told her she made him feel young again. She told him he made her feel like a woman, not a daughter. Layla started to imagine more. She thought about what it would feel like to take Elena's place. She wore her perfume. She sat in her chair at the head of the breakfast table when Elena wasn't home. She started calling Dominic D in whispers, like a lover's nickname only they understood. Elena, meanwhile, felt the distance but couldn't place it. Dominic was colder. Layla was too cheerful. The air in the house had shifted. She found herself left out of conversations, ignored in group photos. When she kissed Dominic goodnight, he barely turned his face. Still, she convinced herself nothing was wrong. She needed the illusion, the perfect family, the elegant life. But the truth was leaking out through the cracks. Dominic stopped being cautious. He left his phone unlocked. Layla texted him during dinner. Sometimes they met in the garage, pressed against the hood of his car with the engine ticking beneath them. The thrill was in the danger. The sex was better when it was a risk. They didn't just want each other. They wanted to be seen, to burn the line they'd already crossed. What they had wasn't love, it was obsession, and it was growing louder, hungrier, and harder to hide. The little things began to break through Elena's denial. She noticed how easily Layla and Dominic laughed around each other, inside jokes. Long glances, smiles that lingered a second too long. At first, she dismissed it as warmth, maybe even healing. But soon, it started to feel wrong. Layla had begun wearing a scent Elena didn't recognize, soft, expensive, the kind Dominic used. To like. Then she remembered. It was the same perfume Dominic had gifted her years ago, when she thought he'd forgotten. Now Layla wore it like a badge. The moment that shattered her comfort came on a Thursday afternoon. Elena reached into Dominic's blazer to drop off his dry cleaning slip and found something else, a folded receipt from a boutique hotel bar downtown. 2 glasses of wine. A suite number scrawled in handwriting that wasn't his. Her stomach dropped. She stared at it, trying to find a way to lie to herself. But the paper trembled in her hand like it already knew the truth. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she waited. The following week, she told him she was going to visit her sister and kissed him goodbye. Then she waited down the block, engine running, sunglasses on, and followed his car. He didn't drive toward the office. He turned into a discreet hotel with mirrored windows and valet parking. She parked 2 streets over and walked. Her heels echoed like gunshots in her head as she approached the front desk, trembling but calm enough to bluff her way upstairs. The moment the suite door opened, she didn't need words. They were tangled in sheets, Layla's back bare against Dominic's chest, laughter frozen on their faces. Elena stood in the doorway, watching her marriage and motherhood collapse in a single shattering second. She screamed. A sound from somewhere primal. Layla scrambled to cover herself, bursting into tears. Dominic reached for his pants but said nothing. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a man struck by lightning. Elena's world had ended. And somewhere deep inside her, rage had begun to take its place. Elena's hands were shaking as she sat behind the wheel, the hotel still looming in her rearview mirror. Her mind raced, replaying the image of her husband and daughter twisted in sheets that weren't theirs. She couldn't cry. She couldn't scream anymore. Something inside her had snapped. Slowly, mechanically, she reached into the glove compartment and pulled out Dominic's handgun, the one he kept for security. She wrapped it in a silk scarf and got out of the car. Her heels clicked across the parking lot, each step fueled by betrayal and fury. She didn't knock this time. She stormed up to the suite and pushed the door open. Dominic and Leela were sitting on the bed, half-dressed, mid-argument. When they saw Elena with the gun in her hand, everything stopped. "What are you doing?" Dominic said, his voice trembling. "You ruined everything," Elena spat. "You sick bastards ruined my life." Layla tried to stand, but Elena screamed at her to sit down. Dominic stepped forward, hands raised, pleading. The room filled with shouts, sobs, and years of buried resentment erupting all at once. Elena slapped Dominic hard across the face. He didn't hit back, he just stared at her like he didn't know who she was anymore. Layla, crying, moved between them. "Please," she said. "It wasn't just him. I wanted this too." Elena's eyes widened, shattered again by the confession. Her hand shook, the gun raised now without thought, aimed at nothing or maybe everything. "You're just a child," she whispered. "You're my child." The gun went off. A single deafening crack split the room. Layla gasped and stumbled backward, red blooming across her torso. Dominic screamed her name and caught her before she collapsed, his hands already slick with blood. Time froze. Layla's breathing came in short, panicked bursts. Elena dropped the gun. Her arms hung limp by her sides, as if her body no longer belonged to her. Far below, the wail of approaching sirens rose like a funeral song. And in that blood-soaked silence, the Calderon family, the image of perfection, was finally, irreversibly destroyed. The story hit the press like wildfire. Stepdaughter, seduction, gunshot. Headlines splashed across newsstands and screens within hours. The Calderon name, once synonymous with luxury real estate and gala fundraisers, was now burned into the national memory for all the wrong reasons. Every outlet wanted a piece of the scandal. Talk shows, tabloids, documentaries in development before the blood had even dried. Dominic was arrested at the hospital, while Leela underwent emergency surgery. Cameras flashed as he was escorted in. Handcuffs, his shirt still stained with her blood. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. His lawyers scrambled to control the narrative. They called it love, not abuse. Passion, not manipulation. But the evidence was unforgiving. Screenshots of texts. Photos from hotel rooms. Surveillance footage of them checking in hand, week after week. Elena, charged with attempted murder, was released on bond pending trial. Her legal team painted her as a shattered wife pushed beyond reason, a woman betrayed by the two people she trusted most. Public sympathy flickered but never caught fire. Some saw her as the villain, others the victim. But no one saw her as innocent. Layla survived the bullet, barely, but she vanished from public view almost immediately. Her name was sealed behind a wall of legal protection, and whispers circulated that she had been admitted to a private psychiatric facility upstate. No interviews, no statements, just silence. The kind that speaks volumes. The Calderons became late-night jokes and cautionary tales. Commentators debated blame. Pundits analyzed power dynamics. Strangers dissected their private lives with righteous disgust. Their mansion in Santa Verona sat untouched for months, a monument to the wreckage behind its gates. They had been a family of prestige and image. Now they were reduced to clickbait and court dates, their darkest truths laid bare for the world to gawk at. The fairy tale had become a scandal, and no amount of wealth could buy their way back into grace. Dominic stood before the court, flanked by attorneys and cameras, and accepted a plea deal that sealed his fate. 10 years in a federal facility for endangering a minor and obstruction of justice. He avoided a trial, avoided the headlines getting any louder than they already were. But he didn't avoid the truth. His name was permanently etched in the public memory, not as a mogul, but as a man who crossed every moral line and called it love. Elena didn't wait for the sentencing. She sold the Santa Verona mansion at a loss, packed what remained of her name into a set of designer luggage, and left. The country, no farewell parties, no goodbyes. Just an empty house and a signature on a wire transfer to a villa in southern Spain. She told no one where she went. Some said she was rebuilding. Others said she was hiding. Maybe both. Layla disappeared completely. She never returned to school. Her friends stopped hearing from her. Social media accounts were deleted. Her name only appeared in psychology journals, now redacted and anonymized, as case studies in trauma, manipulation, and blurred boundaries. Whatever healing she pursued, it was done far from the world that devoured her pain for entertainment. Santa Verona moved on. The news cycle spun forward. A new scandal replaced the Calderons. Their story faded from front pages, but not from the internet. Forums dissected their timeline. Reddit threads rehashed rumors. YouTube documentaries pulled clips from old interviews, painting Dominic and Layla as monsters, victims, or both depending on the thumbnail. Their legacy became a cautionary tale of intimacy dressed as care, of control mistaken for affection. A narrative of forbidden love that had never been love at all, just loneliness colliding with power in the most destructive way possible. They were once the perfect family. But behind the walls of elegance and money, they had built a lie so seductive, it consumed them. And when the smoke cleared, nothing was left but whispers, shame, and the ashes of a fantasy. Whitmore was a quiet town. David Ross, once a school principal, still believed in order and routine. His days were slow and predictable. His wife Nina was calm and polite, always dressed well, always composed. Their life was quiet, almost too quiet. Then Evan arrived. David's son from a past marriage. Evan was 20 and had nowhere else to go. When he moved in, the house didn't change on the outside, but inside everything shifted. Evan brought noise. He brought energy. He brought something that didn't match the rest of the house. He walked through rooms like he didn't belong, but didn't care. He left music playing, doors half open, lights on. At first, no one said anything. David stayed in his study. Nina kept smiling, but something had started. There were moments, small ones, when Nina looked at Evan just a little too long. When Evan didn't look away. There were footsteps that paused near closed doors. The air began to feel warmer. He was just a young man staying with family. That's what anyone would say. But the walls of the Ross house started to remember those Pauses, those looks, that stillness. It was the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt full of something waiting. Something neither of them spoke about. Something that didn't belong in a house like this, but had settled in anyway. Nina had lived the same way for years. Her days were quiet, her routine steady. She made breakfast at 7, watered the plants at 10, read her books by the window in the afternoons. The house was always clean. Her clothes were always pressed. She smiled when she was supposed to. She didn't complain. Life with David was calm. He was kind but distant. Their marriage was polite, not passionate. Their bed was neat. Their words were few. Somewhere along the way, Nina had stopped noticing how long it had been since she felt anything warm in her chest. Her body had become something she folded away with the laundry. But when Evan moved in, something in her woke up. She noticed things, the sound of his footsteps, the sweat on his neck after mowing the lawn, the shape of his arms when he leaned against the fridge. She told herself it was harmless, just passing thoughts. But those thoughts didn't pass. They grew. She found excuses to stay in the same room, to hand him a towel, to brush against him in the hallway. The first time their fingers touched, it could have been an accident. It wasn't. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. Nina began to feel things she thought were long gone. A quickening heartbeat, heat in her skin. Long nights where sleep didn't come. She started wearing softer fabrics, using a little more perfume, watching him when he wasn't looking. Or maybe he was. The shame was there, but quiet. It sat beside her, but it didn't stop her. She had spent too many years waiting. Waiting for what? She didn't even know. But now that something had started inside her, she couldn't stop it. Her body had been quiet for too long. Now it remembered. And it wanted more. Evan had never felt like he belonged anywhere. His life was full of moves, closed doors, and people who gave up too soon. His mother's breakdown left him with no one steady. He floated through homes, foster care, couch after couch. He got used to silence, to keeping his head down, to not expecting comfort. At 20, he was tired. When his father offered a room, it wasn't warmth, it was the last option. David Ross wasn't a real father to him. Just a name, a man with rules. He didn't ask about Evan's past. He just gave him a place to sleep and expected quiet. Evan didn't mind. He had seen worse. The house was cold, clean, full of space that didn't invite him in. But then there was Nina. She wasn't loud or obvious. She moved like she belonged everywhere. She smelled like something soft and expensive. She looked at him like she saw more than his bad habits and lost time. Evan noticed everything. The way her robe slipped a little at the neck when she poured coffee. The way she leaned against the sink with slow hands. The way her voice curled around his name like it meant something. He didn't want to think about her, but he did. Late at night, her steps in the hallway made his chest tighten. In the mornings, he watched her fingers stir cream into tea. She was older, yes, but not distant. She was close. Too close. Evan caught himself thinking about her in the garage, in the shower, while sketching nonsense just to pass the time. He started listening for her voice, watching her lips when she spoke. He didn't plan it. He didn't want it to happen, but every day, something changed. A look held too long. A door left open. Her laughter a little slower when she spoke to him. It felt like a game neither of them admitted to playing. And somehow he didn't feel like an outsider anymore. Not in her presence. Not when she looked at him that way. It was never planned. It started with small things. A towel that stayed in the laundry too long, so Nina brought it to him herself. Her fingers brushed his hand when she passed it over. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. In the hallway, their shoulders touched more than once. No apologies were made. Nina began watching from behind half-closed doors. She stood longer at the top of the stairs if she heard Evan's voice. When he came into the kitchen, she stayed. When he walked past, she turned slightly, letting her robe shift just enough to be noticed. Evan started waking up early, just to sit in the kitchen while she made tea. He didn't say much. He just watched and waited. The air in the house began to feel different. It wasn't cold like before. It was warmer, heavier. Like something was hanging between them, unseen but felt. Nina moved slower. Evan stood closer. Nothing was said. Everything was clear. One night, the air was thick and the house was too quiet. Nina stood in the kitchen, reaching for something in a high cabinet. Evan walked in, barefoot, his shirt loose. He stopped behind her. She didn't turn. He didn't step back. Her breath caught for just a second before she moved past him slowly, carefully, letting her arm graze his. That night, Nina tossed in bed, wide awake, her skin still tingled. She stared at the ceiling, thinking of his eyes, his nearness. Down the hall, Evan's door was unlocked. It hadn't been the night before. She noticed that the house didn't speak. It didn't judge. It just held the silence around them, tight and warm, like a secret waiting to unfold. The storm came in fast, loud and full of wind. Rain hit the windows like fingers tapping to be let in. Then the lights flickered and went out, leaving the house. In deep stillness, Nina lit a candle. The soft glow reached the corners of the kitchen, turning everything gold. Evan stood near the counter, silent, watching her. She poured them each a glass of wine. He didn't refuse. The air felt too warm, like the room was holding its breath. Nina sipped slowly. Evan drank faster. Their eyes met in the dim light, both holding something back. They spoke about the storm, the weather, how quiet the town felt. None of it mattered. Their words were soft covers over louder thoughts. She moved closer. It wasn't bold. It wasn't planned. Just a small lean, like maybe she needed support. Her shoulder brushed his. Her hand touched his arm. The first kiss was clumsy, almost a miss, but his hand moved to her waist without hesitation. He pulled her in. The second kiss was different, slow, steady, full. Her hands shook as they moved across his back. His hands were steady, sure. Their wine sat forgotten on the table. They sank to the floor, guided by heat and hunger. Candles flickered shadows across bare skin. The cold tile against their bodies made no difference. Everything was warm. Her breath caught in her throat. His eyes stayed on her face. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was gentle. They weren't trying to be careful. They were chasing something that had been waiting too long. When it was over, they lay still. No words, no promises. Just skin against skin and the sound of rain hitting glass. Nina stared at the ceiling, chest rising and falling. Evan looked at her once, then away. There was no regret between them, only silence. It didn't stop. It happened again the next morning, and again that afternoon. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. Whenever David left the house, it was as if the air changed. A quiet signal passed between them, wordless and fast. Nina would touch his arm, glance toward the stairs, walk ahead. Evan followed. Sometimes it was the bedroom, sometimes the garage. Once, even the laundry room. Time didn't matter. Only that they weren't alone. It became routine. Nina started changing. She smiled more, wore dresses she hadn't touched in years. She bought Evan new clothes, cologne, leather sketchbooks. She said they were gifts. He didn't argue. Her attention felt endless. Her touch, constant. She stared at him like he was something to own, something she had waited for and finally claimed. He didn't always understand it, but he didn't stop it. Evan's art changed too. The lines got sharper. The colors darker. His drawings filled with strange energy, edges, heat, chaos. He didn't show anyone, but he kept going. He stayed up late, paint on his hands, thoughts running wild. What they had felt dangerous. It looked dangerous too. David noticed the shift, but not the cause. He thought Nina was finally at peace. He thought Evan was settling in. He welcomed the quiet meals, the laughter he hadn't heard in years. He didn't look deeper. He didn't ask questions. He saw calm on the surface and believed in it. But inside the walls, Nina was changing faster than anyone could see. She wasn't just happy, she was desperate. Her thoughts circled the same place every hour. Evan in the morning, Evan in the afternoon, a look, a touch. A moment in the hallway. Her world narrowed until it was only him. She watched the clock until David left. She held her breath every time Evan walked by. Her whole body, her every move, was aimed at one thing. Evan. David didn't notice at first. Life felt better. The house was calmer. Evan was around more. Nina smiled more. But small things began to unsettle him. He caught Nina fixing her hair when Evan walked into the room. He noticed her laugh at things that weren't funny. He smelled wine in the hallway before noon, though no glass was in sight. He told himself not to read into it, but it grew harder to ignore. Nina seemed brighter around Evan, more alert, more alive. And Evan, who had always been quiet, started moving through the house with a new kind of confidence. David didn't understand it. He didn't question it. Until the necklace. It was small, gold, delicate. David found it on Evan's dresser while looking for a missing bill. He froze. It was Nina's. He remembered buying it for her last year. It wasn't lost. It had been left in that room. On purpose or by mistake, he didn't know. He placed it back exactly where he found it, and said nothing. That same evening, David remembered a folder he had left at the community center. He drove back to get it, only to find it already in his briefcase. A useless trip. He returned home earlier than expected. The house was silent. Lights dim. No TV, no clatter from the kitchen. He walked through the living room. Up the stairs. And then he heard it. Soft, repeating, breathing, close. Steady from behind a bedroom door that wasn't fully closed. He paused. Something in his chest tightened. He reached for the handle and pushed. The room wasn't dark. The window blinds let in enough light to see clearly. The bed. The shape of two bodies. One of them Nina, the other Evan. They didn't speak. Neither did he. There was nothing to say. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't scream. He just stood there, staring. Nina pulled the sheet around herself, her mouth already moving with words that didn't make sense. Excuses, apologies, half sentences filled with panic. Evan sat up, silent, unable to look at either of them. David didn't hear what Nina said. He didn't care. Evan started to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Nothing he could say would make it right. Not, I didn't mean to. Not it. Just happened. Not even I'm sorry. None of it mattered now. David saw two people he knew turn into strangers. He stepped forward, slow and certain. Nina reached out, maybe to stop him, maybe to calm him. He slapped her hand away. She tried again. He pushed harder. She stumbled back, hit the dresser, caught her breath. Evan moved, unsure of what to do. Frozen between action and fear. David didn't stop. He crossed the room in a flash. His hands found Nina's arms, her shoulders, her throat. She gasped. Evan shouted. A lamp crashed to the ground. There was the sound of a struggle, bare skin, rough carpet, hard breathing. And then, quiet. Nina lay still. Evan didn't move at first. His eyes locked on her, not understanding. Her chest didn't rise. Her lips didn't part. Her hand, the one that had reached out, stayed curled beside her. David stepped back. His face had no color. He looked at his hands like they didn't belong to him. He said nothing. Evan crawled to Nina, touched her cheek, called her name. No answer. The room felt too small. The air too thick. His fingers found his phone, cold and heavy. He dialed 911, The blood on the floor was dark and quiet, just like everything else.
On July 17th in the summer of 2023, in the quiet suburb of Crestwood Hills, the Carsons had lived here for nearly 12 years. Richard, 45, spent most days in suits that cost more than most mortgages, driving into the city to manage portfolios worth millions. His wife, Sienna, was 42 and known for her flexibility in both yoga and charm. She taught morning classes, drank green juice religiously, and had the kind of sun-kissed skin that made people forget she had a grown daughter in college. But lately, the glow was all surface. Behind her carefully practiced poses and serene laughter was a restless hunger she couldn't name, but felt crawling up her spine every evening when she lay untouched beside her husband. The house next door had been quiet for years, until Naomi Bell moved in with her son. A widow in her 40s, Naomi kept to herself, polite but distant. Her son, Aiden, was different. 19, lanky, with dark, unruly hair and the kind of accidental beauty that made people stare without understanding why. He didn't speak much, didn't try to be charming, but there was something raw and new about him. He was unpolished. Untouched. Sienna noticed him first on a Saturday morning, shirtless, pushing a lawnmower across the Bell's front yard. His body was lean but sculpted, muscles shifting under soft, pale skin glistening with sweat. She paused mid-sip of her smoothie and watched from behind her sunglasses. He didn't see her. Or maybe he did, but he didn't react. She found herself standing at the mailbox a little too long when he was outside. Let her robe hang open longer than usual when watering her plants. Dropped her keys on purpose. The heat in her chest wasn't guilt. It was electricity. A charge. A pulse she hadn't felt in over a decade. Aiden wasn't trying to seduce her. That's what made it worse. Or better. Something was shifting. She could feel it. Every step Aiden took, every glance he didn't mean to give, cracked something beneath the surface. It wasn't love. It wasn't even curiosity. It was appetite. And Crestwood Hills, for all its perfection, had no idea what was coming. Richard spent most nights hunched over his laptop, muttering into Bluetooth calls, studying market trends like they were sacred texts. Sienna had learned not to interrupt him. Meals were eaten in silence. He left early. Came home late. He gave her a kiss on the cheek like he was clocking in. The sex had stopped 3 years ago, not with a fight, but with a shrug. They didn't even argue anymore. They just existed, parallel but separate, like strangers with a shared mortgage. Sienna filled the silence with scented candles, collagen smoothies, and long sessions of yoga that left her muscles sore but her body unsatisfied. Her hands missed being held. Her skin missed being noticed. She'd started staring at herself in the mirror longer than necessary, lifting her breasts, smoothing her thighs. The woman who once turned heads now stared into her own reflection, wondering when she had vanished. Aiden had grown quiet since his father died. The grief hadn't made him weepy, it made him hollow. He didn't party, didn't date. He studied at home, worked part-time, and helped his mother when he could. But he noticed Sienna. Of course he did. The way she moved, the sway of her hips and leggings, the way her tank tops clung to her skin when she stretched in the sun. She never looked away when she caught him watching. She smiled. She always smiled. One afternoon after mowing, sweat slick on his back, she brought him a glass of water. He took it. She let her fingers brush his. Not by accident. He looked down, then up. She was still looking. The next day he mentioned his back hurt. She offered to massage it. Said she had oils. She led him inside, told him to lie down. Her hands were soft but firm, sliding over his bare skin, lingering just a second too long above the waistband of his shorts. When he turned to look at her, her robe slipped off one shoulder. She didn't fix it. They started texting, first about nothing, then about everything. Then came the wine. Late nights on her patio under warm string lights, her knees brushing his, her laugh a little louder, her lips stained dark. She asked if he thought she was beautiful. He said yes. She asked again, closer. He didn't answer with words that time. He just looked at her mouth. She touched his arm when she spoke. He didn't pull away. She leaned in when she laughed. He breathed her in. It was a dance. A slow, dangerous one. But neither of them was pulling back. The first time it happened, the sun was burning high and the pool water shimmered like glass. Richard was away on a conference, out of state. Sienna invited Aiden over under the excuse of helping with the patio chairs. When he showed up, she was already in the water, wearing a bikini so small it looked like lingerie. Wet fabric clung to her curves, barely concealing anything. She floated slowly, eyes on him the whole time. He hesitated, said he should go. She swam closer, told him to jump in. When he didn't move, she splashed him playfully, then dove beneath the surface. Before he could react, she was beside him underwater, hands on his chest, her lips finding his. He gasped, but didn't resist. When they surfaced, she was on him, fingers pulling at his waistband, breath hot in his ear. The silence of the neighborhood wrapped around them as they kissed against the edge of the pool, bodies slick, urgency overwhelming common sense. From there, it spiraled fast. Reckless. Hungry. He came back the next day. Then again the day after that. They stopped pretending. Her bedroom became their haven, sheets twisted, clothes strewn, candles lit in the middle of the day. The kitchen counter, with sunlight pouring through the blinds, became another altar. The shower steamed around them, her moans echoing off tile. She told him where to put his hands, what she liked, how to move. He listened. Learned. Improved. She made him feel like a man. He made her feel alive. It was more than sex. It was defiance. Escape. Every time they touched, it erased everything else, the numbness in her marriage, the grief in his chest. It became a drug, one they both craved. They met when Richard was at work, or when Naomi was running errands. They drove to motels on the edge of town, checked in under fake names. She wore short dresses with nothing underneath. He watched her walk ahead and knew exactly what was waiting. But then the thrill began to twist. Aiden started asking questions. Where she'd been. Why she hadn't replied. He got jealous when she laughed at someone else's joke. Possessive when she didn't initiate. She brushed it off, told him to relax, but the way he stared made her uneasy. She, in turn, started lying more. Making excuses even when she didn't have to. Deleting texts. Locking her phone. Richard started noticing the shifts, her perfume at strange hours, the sudden showers before bed, her distracted gaze at dinner. He began staying home more often. Asking questions. Watching her. The affair had burned hot. Now it was beginning to boil. And the pressure was rising. The air was thick with summer heat that night, even with the windows cracked. Upstairs, the bedroom glowed in the warm flicker of candlelight. Soft music spilled from a speaker on the dresser, slow, sensual, a rhythm that matched their breath. Sienna straddled Aiden, his wrists tied gently to the bedposts with silk scarves she'd once used in yoga class. Her hair hung loose, brushing his chest. He smiled up at her, eyes heavy, body surrendered. It wasn't just sex anymore, it was ritual, reckless and complete. Downstairs, the front door clicked open. Richard hadn't planned to come home. The client dinner had been booked for weeks, but something in him, a gnawing instinct he couldn't explain, made him cancel. He drove home without thinking, turned into the driveway, saw Sienna's car parked where it shouldn't have been. He entered quietly. The house smelled like lavender and wine. He heard music. Muffled. Not the kind his wife ever played when she was alone. He climbed the stairs slowly, step by step, unsure what he expected, but knowing it would be bad. He turned down the hallway, the bedroom door slightly ajar. Light flickered. Shadows moved. When he pushed it open, time stopped. Sienna was naked, riding a boy who looked barely legal, wrists bound, head thrown back in pleasure. Her eyes opened and met Richard's, but it was too late. Aiden turned his head, stunned. Panic rippled across the room like a blast wave. Then the sound exploded, shouting, sheets ripping, bodies scrambling. Sienna screamed something unintelligible. Aiden tried to pull free, the scarves tangling around his wrists. Richard lunged. The lamp on the nightstand shattered as it was knocked over. Aiden jumped off the bed, pants half on, reaching for anything. Richard's eyes locked on the glass decanter on the shelf. A gift from their anniversary, heavy, sharp-edged, filled with scotch. His hand closed around it. One swing. A sickening crunch. Aiden dropped to his knees. Blood sprayed the wall. Richard hit him again. This time, the boy collapsed forward, unmoving. The silk scarves dragged off the bed as his arms went limp. His body hit the carpet with a dull, wet thud. Silence followed, thick, vibrating, suffocating. Sienna stood frozen, her hands pressed to her mouth, her chest heaving, eyes wide with disbelief. Blood pooled quickly beneath Aiden's head, soaking into the beige carpet. It crept toward Richard's feet. He dropped the decanter. It rolled once, then stopped. His breathing came in shallow bursts. His hands trembled. His knuckles were red, slick, shaking. He looked at Sienna. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Neither of them moved. The first call came from the neighbors across the street. They'd heard screams, sharp, panicked, and unmistakably real. A second neighbor called moments later, reporting glass shattering and something that sounded like a body hitting the floor. By the time the flashing lights flooded Crestwood Lane, the once silent suburb had become a crime scene. Sienna was on the front steps, sobbing uncontrollably, wearing only a robe clutched tightly around her trembling body. Her skin was streaked with sweat and panic, her mascara smudged into ghostly trails down her cheeks. She couldn't form words, just fragments. "Help, please, blood, he." Inside, Richard stood like a statue in the middle of the bedroom. His shirt was drenched in deep, red patches. His hands, slack by his sides, were shaking. He didn't resist. Didn't speak. Just stared down at the body on the floor, eyes vacant. Aiden lay motionless, half covered by a blood-soaked towel someone had tried to press to his head too late. Paramedics rushed him out on a stretcher, sirens screaming. For a moment, it looked like maybe he was breathing, maybe there was still a chance. But by 9:47 p.m., the hospital confirmed it. Aiden Bell was pronounced dead on arrival. When Naomi got the call, she collapsed in her hallway. Her only son. Her quiet, broken-hearted boy. Gone. Back at the Carsons' home, detectives secured the scene. Evidence bags filled quickly, the decanter, the shattered lamp, the blood-stained sheets. They found silk scarves, torn at the seams. Aiden's phone was unlocked. Sienna's, too. What unfolded over the next few hours wasn't just a murder investigation. It was a descent into scandal. Text messages, hundreds of them, detailing flirtation, desire, naked selfies, meeting times. Hotel receipts. Surveillance footage from a motel lobby showing Sienna in sunglasses, holding Aiden's hand. It was more than an affair. It was obsession. Detectives pieced the timeline together quickly, the seduction, the secrecy, the spiraling affair, and the violent end. The motive wasn't a mystery. The emotion was raw, unfiltered, and devastating. At 11:18 p.m., Richard was read his rights. He didn't resist the cuffs. He just nodded, as if he'd been expecting this all along. The cameras were already outside when they walked him to the cruiser. Crestwood Hills had never seen blood on its streets. Now, the perfect suburb had become a headline. The trial began 6 months after the killing, and by then, Crestwood was no longer whispering, it was watching. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. News vans lined the curb. Neighbors who once shared cocktails with the Carsons now clutched court passes, waiting to witness the unraveling of one of their own. It was no longer about guilt or innocence. It was about how something so polished had shattered so completely. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted Richard as a man who let his ego metastasize into fury. A man who couldn't handle humiliation. They described the scene in vivid detail, the blood, the decanter, the screams. Photos flashed across the screen. Aiden's broken body. Sienna's tear-streaked face. The jury flinched more than once. The prosecution said it wasn't self-defense. It wasn't temporary insanity. It was murder born of rage, plain and simple. The defense countered with emotion. They called it a crime of passion. They spoke of betrayal so deep it fractured Richard's mind. His wife in bed with a teenager. Aiden, barely older than their own daughter. The silk scarves. The candles. The sheer brutality of what he walked in on. They said Richard didn't plan anything. He snapped. A man, betrayed beyond reason, caught in a moment no one should ever face. Sienna took the stand on day 4. She looked older. Pale. Her voice shook. She confessed everything. No sugarcoating. She spoke of the loneliness, the attention, the hunger she hadn't admitted to anyone, not even herself. She said she seduced Aiden, not the other way around. Said she knew it was wrong but didn't stop. When asked if she loved Aiden, she broke down. Naomi followed. She didn't cry. Her grief had calcified into something sharper. She talked about her boy. How he'd struggled since his father's death. How he'd just started to smile again. How he trusted Sienna, how they both did. And how that trust had been violated, shattered, and drowned in blood. Richard took the stand last. His voice was calm, almost too calm. He said he didn't go there to kill anyone. That he didn't even know what he was walking into. That what he saw destroyed him. That the man he was at that moment wasn't the man he used to be. He spoke directly to Naomi. Said he was sorry. Said it wouldn't bring Aiden back, but he meant it anyway. Psychologists were divided. One said Richard suffered a complete emotional collapse, a textbook example of betrayal trauma. Another said it was about pride, control, losing his grip on a carefully curated life. The jury listened. Crestwood listened. No one left untouched. Not the jury. Not the spectators. Not the families who once shared summer barbecues. What had happened in that bedroom wasn't just sex or violence. It was something deeper. A fracture in the illusion. A crack that exposed how vulnerable even the strongest-looking lives really were. The verdict came after 8 hours of deliberation. The courtroom sat in heavy silence as the jury foreman stood, eyes scanning the paper in his hands. Guilty, second-degree murder. No outbursts. No gasps. Just a collective breath held, then released. Richard Carson didn't react. He simply nodded once, like he already knew. The judge delivered the sentence, 18 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 12. The gavel came down like a coffin lid. Richard was led away in cuffs, his suit wrinkled, face unreadable. He didn't look back. Sienna didn't return to the house after the trial. Within weeks, moving trucks came and went, her name quietly erased from the neighborhood registry. Some said she moved to the coast. Others whispered about plastic surgery, a new identity. No one knew for sure. But she left behind more than just furniture. Naomi stayed. But she was never the same. She stopped teaching. Stopped gardening. The blinds in her windows remained drawn. Some days she could be seen sitting on the porch, staring at the Carson house with an expression somewhere between sorrow and fury. People tried to comfort her, but nothing helped. There was no comfort for the kind of grief that carved holes you could never fill. The Carson house sat empty for a year. Then someone bought it, painted the walls, replaced the carpet. They lasted 6 months. The next family lasted 4. Then 2. Realtors stopped promising quiet suburban charm and started whispering about disclosure laws. The house became a symbol, not of violence, but of what hid beneath appearances. Crestwood had lost its shine. The streets still looked the same clean lawns, the same tidy hedges, but there was a shadow now. A hum under the surface. The neighbors stopped waving as much. Stopped smiling as wide. Crestwood used to be perfect. Now it's just haunted. He was a respected neurosurgeon. She was a beloved family doctor. No one saw it coming. To the outside world, they were the epitome of success, a power couple with brilliant medical careers, 3 beautiful children, and a picture-perfect life. Behind closed doors, however, a far darker truth was festering. Ilana Frick, a woman who had dedicated her life to healing others, was living a silent nightmare. The very man she loved, trusted, and built a life with would become her killer. Their home, once a sanctuary, turned into a prison of control, abuse, and psychological torment. And on one chilling night, that nightmare ended in the most horrifying way. What makes this tragedy even more haunting is that it unfolded not in isolation, but with an accidental witness, their own 12-year-old daughter, who caught a glimpse of something no child should ever see. Ilana Christina Frick was born in 1977 in Windsor, Ontario, to George and Anna Frick, Croatian immigrants who had arrived in Canada in the early 1970s. She was the younger of 2 daughters and a miracle child, as her mother had been told she would never conceive again after complications with her first pregnancy. Ilana grew up in a hard-working household where her parents were employed at a local car factory, determined to give their daughters a better life. From an early age, Ilana stood out for her intelligence, discipline, and strong will. She excelled in academics, particularly in math and science, and participated in extracurricular activities like gymnastics, dance, and track and field. Despite her busy schedule, she often worked summer jobs in cornfields to help support her family, always careful with her earnings. Ilana's dedication paid off when she graduated high school at the top of her class and gained admission to a prestigious medical university. During this time, she began a romantic relationship with Matthew Ryan, a fellow student she had known since high school. Their relationship grew stronger as they studied side by side, sharing dreams of building a future together in medicine. However, after graduation, their paths diverged. Ilana was accepted into a competitive residency program in Ottawa, determined to pursue her career goals. Matthew, content with a local hospital job, chose to stay behind. Though they tried to maintain a long-distance relationship, by 2002, Ilana made the difficult decision to end things. Her focus was now set firmly on advancing her education and building a career that matched her ambitions. In 2003, during a late-night hospital shift, Ilana stepped into the staff lounge and locked eyes with a new colleague. His name was Mohammed Shamji, a neurosurgery resident who had recently joined the program. Just a year older than Ilana, Mohammed came from a prestigious family of medical professionals. His father was a respected surgeon, his mother a psychiatrist, and his older brother a medical biophysicist. The Shamji name carried weight in the medical community. Mohammed had studied at Yale and later returned to Canada to complete his doctorate at Western Ontario. To Ilana, he seemed mysterious and intriguing. He was tall, quiet, and reserved, introverted to the point of being emotionally distant. While others might have seen coldness or disinterest, Ilana interpreted it as depth. She was immediately drawn to him. When he eventually messaged her after getting her number from a colleague, Ilana responded with enthusiasm. Their connection quickly developed into a relationship, but it was far from stable. The romance was rocky, marked by repeated breakups and reconciliations, mostly driven by Ilana's persistence. Even as Mohammed showed little initiative or emotional openness, Ilana remained hopeful. She showered him with attention, bringing him homemade meals, giving thoughtful gifts, and always trying to make him feel loved. Her parents, however, saw warning signs early on. They disapproved of his aloofness and the way he treated their daughter. They urged Ilana to end the relationship, concerned she was giving too much and receiving too little. But Ilana believed she had found her soulmate. Despite the emotional imbalance and repeated setbacks, she convinced herself that love would be enough to overcome any obstacles. She ignored her family's concerns and stayed committed to Muhammad, determined to make the relationship work. In the summer of 2004, Ilana discovered she was pregnant. The news came as a shock, stirring anxiety rather than joy in both her and Muhammad. Despite their unstable relationship, Muhammad felt compelled to follow cultural expectations and marry her before the child was born. The wedding was organized quickly and held in two parts. One ceremony followed traditional customs for Muhammad's family, and the other was a more modern celebration attended by their friends at an upscale restaurant. Outwardly, it looked like the beginning of a happy life together, but the cracks were already forming. The couple moved into a spacious home in a wealthy Ottawa neighborhood, a symbol of the successful life they were building. In January 2005, Ilana gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Yasmin. While Ilana was overjoyed, Muhammad's reaction was muted. He had been hoping for a son and couldn't hide his disappointment. As the demands of parenthood grew, so did the emotional distance between them. Muhammad focused entirely on his career, retreating to his home office after work and avoiding meaningful time with his wife and child. Ilana, now on maternity leave, devoted herself to caring for their daughter and managing the household. But instead of appreciation, she received criticism. Muhammad often belittled her, questioning her appearance, dismissing her efforts, and calling her useless. His disapproval seeped into every part of their life together. What began as subtle control soon evolved into overt emotional abuse. He dictated how she dressed, criticized her meals, and undermined her parenting decisions. Ilana, once confident and strong, began to doubt herself. She didn't confide in friends or family, believing she could manage on her own. But the man she had once seen as shy and gentle was revealing a different side, one of dominance, coldness, and resentment. In the summer of 2005, the tension in the Shamji household reached a terrifying peak. During a heated argument, Muhammad lost control and struck Ilana in the face with such force that he broke her nose. Bloodied and shaken, she grabbed her infant daughter and fled the house, seeking refuge with close friends. For the first time, she took legal action against her husband. Ilana filed a police report for domestic violence and began preparing for divorce, finally acknowledging that the man she had fought so hard to keep was dangerous. The decision didn't come easily. Ilana still loved Muhammad, but the violence had escalated beyond anything she could rationalize. With the support of her family and friends, she seemed ready to walk away. But then Muhammad began pleading with her. He begged for a second chance, promising that it would never happen again. He said he was under immense pressure, that he had made a terrible mistake, and that he needed her forgiveness. More than anything, he warned that a criminal record would ruin his medical career and jeopardize his acceptance into Duke University's prestigious doctorate program. Ilana was torn. The logical part of her knew she had every right to leave, that this wouldn't be the last time he hurt her. But another part of her, the one that still clung to hope, wanted to believe he could change. In the end, she withdrew the charges and chose to stay. When Muhammad was officially accepted into Duke's biomedical engineering program, she agreed to move with him to North Carolina. The charges disappeared, and so did the police report. Ilana convinced herself that it was a fresh start. They would be away from familiar pressures, in a new environment, with a second chance to rebuild their marriage. But the decision to follow him across the border would only delay the inevitable and cost her far more than she could have imagined. Life in North Carolina seemed calmer on the surface. Muhammad focused on his demanding biomedical engineering program at Duke, while Ilana pursued a master's degree at the School of Policy and Health, earning a scholarship that covered her tuition. The couple appeared to be reconnecting, spending more time together, and even deciding to expand their family. In August 2007, Ilana gave birth to their second child, a daughter named Faisa. But once again, Muhammad couldn't hide his disappointment. He had hoped for a son. Despite this, the family maintained a polished image. They began sharing moments of their life on social media, pictures of academic achievements, elegant dinners, outings with the children, and vacations that painted a picture of stability and happiness. To friends, colleagues, and online followers, the Shamjis looked like the perfect couple, ambitious, successful, and deeply in love. Behind the curated posts, the reality was far different. Muhammad continued to exert strict control over Ilana. He tracked her phone calls and emails, regularly checked her social media messages, and constantly criticized how she dressed, how she looked, and how she was raising their daughters. His approval was rare, and his judgment unrelenting. Ilana often felt like she was walking on eggshells, careful to avoid triggering his temper or disapproval. Still, she said nothing to those around her. She kept up the illusion, convinced she could endure it for the sake of her children and the life they had built. The calm was only on the surface. Beneath it, the emotional abuse was tightening its grip, and the walls of her world were slowly closing in. In 2011, Muhammad was offered a prestigious fellowship in spinal surgery at a leading medical center in Calgary. He accepted without hesitation, moving there alone while Ilana and the children remained in Ottawa due to her work commitments. The distance created space between them, but not in the way Ilana had hoped. During one of Muhammad's visits home, he accidentally left his laptop open. Ilana noticed a message from a woman on his social media account, and the conversation left little to the imagination. When confronted, Muhammad didn't deny it, he admitted to having an affair. It was another devastating blow for Ilana. The betrayal cut deep, but once again, she chose to forgive him. She held on to the idea that their marriage could still be saved, that it could be mended for the sake of their children. Not long after, they moved to Toronto together, where Muhammad had secured a prestigious and well-paying position. Hoping to stabilize the relationship, Ilana agreed to try for another child. In October 2013, she gave birth to a baby boy named Marius. Muhammad was finally pleased to have a son, but the change was superficial. His attitude toward Ilana remained cold and critical. The brief moments of peace were overshadowed by renewed control, frequent verbal attacks, and the slow return of physical abuse. Ilana did her best to maintain the image of a united family, but her emotional exhaustion was growing more visible to those around her. During a ski trip with the family, she returned home with a deep cut on her arm and other bruises. She claimed it was an accident, but later confided in a close friend that the injuries were the result of another violent outburst from Muhammad, triggered by a confrontation over a second affair. Her friends urged her to leave, warning her that the cycle would never break. But Ilana couldn't bring herself to walk away. Despite everything, she still believed she could fix what was broken. She still believed that love, forgiveness, and commitment would eventually be enough. What she didn't realize was that every second she stayed, the danger was growing and time was running out. By 2016, Ilana had become a highly respected figure in the medical community. She was appointed as a delegate for the Ontario Medical Association, a role that reflected not only her intelligence but her growing influence in the healthcare field. To the outside world, her life appeared to be thriving, balancing a successful career, 3 children, and a seemingly perfect family. But beneath the surface, the pressure was becoming unbearable. During a family ski vacation earlier that year, Ilana returned home with noticeable injuries. She told others she had fallen while skiing, but in a private moment with her closest friend, she revealed the truth. Muhammad had attacked her again, this time during an argument sparked by suspicions of yet another affair. Her friend, alarmed and heartbroken, urged her once more to leave. This time, Ilana seemed more receptive. After their 12th wedding anniversary in September 2016, Ilana made the decision she had long avoided. She told Muhammad she wanted a divorce. For the first time, she began to distance herself emotionally and mentally from the marriage. She stopped trying to fix things, stopped making excuses. Instead, she found solace and confidence in a new connection, a romantic relationship with a colleague who had shown her kindness, support, and the kind of affection she hadn't experienced in years. This new relationship gave Ilana a sense of possibility, a glimpse of a different life, one where she was not controlled, criticized, or hurt. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, appreciated, and safe. It was the beginning of emotional healing, but it also marked the start of Muhammad's unraveling. He sensed the shift, the loss of control, and it terrified him. Ilana had finally found her strength, and in doing so, she had become someone he could no longer dominate. That loss of power would soon ignite the final, deadly act of violence. On November 30th, 2016, Ilana returned home from a 3-day medical conference in Montreal. She was calm, collected, and resolute. That evening, she made what would be her final phone call to her parents. Though her voice carried a hint of unease, she reassured them that everything was fine. What they didn't know was that Alana had also attempted to call the police shortly after, but in her panic, she misdialed the number by a single digit. The call never went through. Sometime later that night, a heated argument erupted between Alana and Mohammed. She told him again that the marriage was over, that she was serious this time. Mohammed, who had grown increasingly desperate and unstable, snapped. As the confrontation escalated, Alana tried once more to reach for her phone, but Mohammed struck it from her hand. He then began hitting her repeatedly. The violence turned frenzied. He pinned her to the floor and strangled her with his bare hands. In his blind rage, he broke her neck. Unbeknownst to him, their 12-year-old daughter, Yasmin, had heard the commotion and quietly cracked the bedroom door open. She saw her father kneeling behind the bed and sensed something was terribly wrong, though she couldn't see her mother. Mohammed noticed her and barked at her to shut the door and go back to her room. In shock, Yasmin obeyed. By morning, she was told that her mother had packed her things and left them to be with her lover. After realizing Alana was dead, Mohammed stuffed her body into a large suitcase. She was still dressed in her pajamas, barefoot, her body bearing the marks of a violent death. He loaded the suitcase into his car and drove aimlessly for hours. Eventually, he reached a small bridge along the Humber River, roughly 24 miles from their home. Under the cover of darkness, he dumped the suitcase near the base of the bridge, hoping the current would carry it away and erase the evidence. But the suitcase got lodged at the foundation, clearly visible from the path above. The next morning, Alana's mother grew worried when she couldn't reach her daughter. She called Mohammed, who calmly repeated that Alana had run away with another man. But her parents didn't believe him, not for a second. They alerted the police and asked a close friend to check the house. The friend noted that Alana's car was still in the driveway, and nothing about the home looked disturbed. Alarmed, the family flew to Toronto and officially reported her missing. On the morning of December 2nd, a man walking his dog along the Humber River noticed a suitcase at the edge of the bridge. Curious and slightly uneasy, he unzipped it. Inside was the lifeless body of a blonde woman. Authorities were immediately called. Identification was swift. The suitcase still had the airline tag from Alana's recent trip, and her parents confirmed her identity. The post-mortem report revealed multiple bruises, abrasions, and a broken neck caused by mechanical asphyxiation. Alana had been murdered in her own home and discarded like trash. In the days following the discovery of Alana's body, the investigation quickly pointed to Mohammed. His behavior was erratic, his story inconsistent, and the evidence overwhelming. He was arrested at a coffee shop where he had been meeting with a lawyer, likely preparing to flee. Initially, Mohammed denied any involvement in his wife's death. But as the reality of his situation closed in, another terrible truth emerged. His 12-year-old daughter Yasmin had partially witnessed the murder. She had seen enough to know something awful had happened. Though she didn't witness the entire act, the trauma of that night had already left an imprint. Investigators were preparing for the possibility that she might have to testify in court. But Mohammed, in a rare act of paternal instinct or perhaps guilt, confessed. He said he didn't want his daughter to be dragged through the horror of a trial. In his statement, he claimed the argument had spiraled out of control, that he had no intention of killing Alana. He admitted to knocking the phone from her hand, hitting her, pinning her down, and ultimately breaking her neck in a fit of rage. In April 2019, Mohammed Shamji was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder, with the possibility of parole in 14 years. The courtroom was filled with friends, colleagues, and family members, all of whom once admired him, now staring at the shell of a man who had destroyed his own family. He was permanently stripped of his medical license, banned from ever practicing or teaching medicine again. The career he had sacrificed everything for was gone. The aftermath extended beyond him. His father, Dr. Farid Shamji, came under public scrutiny after making dismissive and offensive comments about Alana, suggesting she had provoked the violence. These remarks sparked outrage and led to a formal investigation. Farid's medical license was also revoked, tarnishing what was once a respected family legacy. Alana's children, Yasmin, Faisa, and Marius, were placed under the care of her parents. They were left to rebuild their lives without their mother, carrying the trauma of what had been taken from them. Yasmin, now old enough to understand the depth of what she had seen, would carry that memory forever. The man who had once been trusted to heal spines had crushed the life of the woman who loved him most. Behind the title of doctor was a violent, controlling man who could not tolerate losing control. He could perform complex surgeries, repair damaged vertebrae, and give people back their mobility. But in the end, he destroyed the one person who had always believed in him. He could heal spines, but destroyed the woman who loved him. Carlo Lissi appeared to be everything a woman could dream of: tall, athletic, clean-cut, and intelligent. He held a stable job at a prestigious IT firm in Milan, earned well, and presented himself as the ideal family man. To neighbors, friends, and colleagues, Carlo was a respectful, soft-spoken gentleman. He was the kind of man who opened doors for others, smiled politely at strangers, and attended school functions with his children. His wife, Christina, was admired for her elegance and intelligence, and together, they were viewed as the picture-perfect family. No one suspected the darkness lurking beneath his calm exterior. But behind Carlo's composed demeanor was something cold and detached. Beneath the surface charm and social grace lived a man without empathy, a man whose emotions ran skin deep. When news broke that he had murdered his wife and 2 young children in cold blood, the nation was left stunned. How could someone so seemingly loving commit such a monstrous act? The question that continues to haunt anyone who hears the story is simple yet chilling. What drives a man to murder his entire family not in a fit of rage, but with clear, premeditated calculation? What could possibly justify such horror in his mind? As we explore Carlo Lissi's life and unravel the mask he wore so well, we're forced to confront a disturbing psychological truth, one that points toward the profile of a psychopath. Not the wild-eyed madman from movies, but the man next door with a smile that hides nothing but emptiness. In the early hours of June 14, 2014, the peaceful town of Mata Visconti was jolted awake by the frantic cries of a man. Carlo Lissi ran out of his home, shouting incoherently for help. His face was pale, his voice trembling, and he appeared shaken to the core. Neighbors peeked through their windows and some rushed out, finding Carlo in a state of what seemed like pure terror. He claimed that someone had broken into his house while he was away watching a soccer match at a local bar. According to him, intruders had slaughtered his entire family while he had narrowly escaped such a fate. But as concerned neighbors tried to understand what was happening, something about Carlo's behavior stood out. He kept referring to his wife and children not as my wife or my kids, but as the bodies. He insisted he couldn't go back inside, that he couldn't bring himself to touch them or check if they were still alive. When the emergency operator asked if anyone had a pulse, Carlo flatly refused to step back into the home, repeating that it was too late. When the police and medics arrived minutes later, they entered the Lissi home and discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. Christina lay lifeless in the living room, brutally stabbed. Upstairs, 5-year-old Julia and 18-month-old Gabriel were found in their beds with their throats slit. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing in the home appeared stolen. Carlo's response to the confirmation of his family's death was disturbingly subdued. He tried to cry, his face twisting in strange expressions, but no tears came. His voice remained even, his posture unnervingly composed. The man who had just lost his entire family stood among flashing lights and horrified neighbors, yet showed no true sign of grief or shock. Instead, there was a hollow stillness to him, an emptiness that didn't quite fit the moment. From that point forward, investigators began to suspect that the man pleading for help might not be a survivor at all, but the architect of the nightmare they had just uncovered. It didn't take long for the first cracks to appear in Carlo's carefully constructed version of events. From the start, the supposed break-in raised eyebrows. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damaged locks. The doors were intact, and all valuables, including cash and jewelry, remained untouched in plain sight. What kind of intruder left behind everything of value and committed such a brutal, targeted crime? Then came the most bizarre element, the video. Carlo claimed he had recorded the moment he discovered his murdered family, thinking it might somehow prove his innocence. In the footage, he can be seen entering the home, approaching Christina's body, and then abruptly turning the camera away and running outside in apparent panic. but the video revealed more than he intended. He never checked for a pulse. He never went upstairs to his children. And crucially, he already seemed to know exactly what he would find before he saw it. Further examination of Carlo's clothing revealed faint blood splatters, not just anywhere, but on the back of his shirt and underwear. When asked, he claimed the blood came from trying to revive his family, but the locations of the stains didn't align with that explanation. Forensic experts quickly concluded that the scene had been clumsily staged. Some items were oddly placed or barely disturbed, more like props than evidence of a struggle. The floor had been cleaned in places, and the murder weapon had no fingerprints. His statements only made things worse. They were disjointed, contradictory, and filled with odd omissions. He struggled to recall basic details, changed his story multiple times, and offered explanations that didn't match the evidence. The more he talked, the more suspicious he appeared. It became clear to investigators that the narrative of a random break-in made no sense. The calculated nature of the murders, the inconsistencies in Carlo's behavior, and the mounting forensic evidence pointed in one direction. Within hours, the grieving husband transformed into the prime suspect. Detectives brought Carlo in for formal questioning, no longer treating him as a victim, but as the man who had orchestrated a massacre behind closed doors. Christina Lissi was the kind of woman who seemed destined for success from an early age. Born and raised in the northern Italian town of Pavia, she stood out for her intelligence, ambition, and fierce independence. She was a top student, active in her school's drama club, and known for her strong voice and stage presence. Her passion for theater never faded, even as she pursued a career in the corporate world. Christina was a natural leader, organized, composed, and deeply committed to whatever she took on. Friends described her as magnetic, and her family took pride in her achievements. After completing her education, she secured a job at a major insurance company and quickly climbed the ranks to a respected managerial position. Despite the professional demands, she never lost her love for the arts and often performed in local musicals. She had a strong sense of self and believed in balancing ambition with heart. What she truly yearned for, beyond her accomplishments, was a stable, loving family of her own. When she met Carlo Lissi, she believed she had finally found that missing piece. He was younger, handsome, and carried himself with charm and quiet confidence. Christina saw in him a partner she could build a life with, someone she could mold into the man she needed. Though he was hesitant and emotionally reserved, she mistook his passivity for gentleness. Her parents, however, were not convinced. They viewed Carlo as emotionally immature and lacking in depth. Christina's mother once remarked that he seemed like a child in a man's body. But Christina was used to following her own path. She dismissed their concerns, believing that love could bridge any gap, and that with time, Carlo would grow into the role of a devoted husband and father. She couldn't have known how tragically wrong she would be. Carlo Lissi was born in 1982 in the small Italian town of Caserano, the eldest of two sons in a household dominated by a rigid and authoritarian father. From a young age, he was taught obedience, not expression. His father demanded perfection, enforcing strict rules and punishing even the smallest disobedience. In contrast, Carlo's younger brother was pampered and favored, creating a deep sense of resentment and inadequacy in Carlo that he never voiced aloud. He was raised to meet expectations, not to question them, and as a result, he became a child who excelled in school and followed instructions, but felt nothing deeply. He was emotionally withdrawn, quiet, and often bullied at school. He lacked close friendships and drifted through his teenage years unnoticed. His father's control had crushed his self-esteem, leaving no room for confidence or identity. Rather than confront or rebel, Carlo adapted by blending in.